Chapter 610. When the Acronians were building their platinum wooden horse, the siege of Liege had reached a critical moment. However, as if at the last moment of redemption, the Acronians finally won the hope of the desperate situation. From adversity to paradise, it was only a thin line. Kelsey Namank's desperate wooden horse, Paradise of Adversity I, 25 Dark, Treasure, Artifact Wonder, Effect. This card must be tapped into the field. Inspect your deck. Search for 4 creature cards from your deck and remove them from the duel. Then shuffle your deck. Tap, pay 40, 0. There are 40 counters on this card. After this card enters the field, every time a non-black creature dies on your field, remove a counter from it. When you remove the last counter, use it without paying the spell cost, and place the card that was removed from the field into the field. Opportunity lurks in the storm, hope in the desperate situation. Desperate wooden horse entered the field. A gear ball floated above Brando's head, and his dark elemental pool dropped to 1660. Then the deck opened in front of him layer by layer, and dozens of cards of fate circled around him, but only the creature cards were distributed in bright colors. Vampire Baron, Rune Summoner, Glorious Martyr, the remaining 5 Death Sentinels, 4 Glorious Trumpeters, 4 Acronian Spellweavers, 1 Pristine Archangel, and 1 Silver Colt. Brando stretched out his hand and selected the Glorious Martyr, Vampire Baron, and 2 Death Sentinels, and then placed them out of the field. On the battlefield, the cruise's white-winged knight began to gather in the sky again. The white-winged knights once again launched an attack, but this time they were facing the mercenaries of Lopez and Ropar's 2 teams of Fireclaw spearmen. Furlan stretched out her 5 fingers with a cold expression, and icicles blew out from behind her. The blade-like icy wind wrapped in ice crystals formed cyclones, and swept past the white-winged knights' formation, forming a thick layer of frost on the surface of their armor. The low temperature caused the Pegasi's flapping of wings to slow down. Their speed was also greatly reduced. Meanwhile, Yadi took the opportunity to shoot out thin bolts of lightning from her fingertips. Her target was not the knight on the horse. They were both gold tier. Although the elementalist could suppress the knight, it would take too much mana to kill him. It would also take too much time. Her target was the Pegasus. A knight's role was reflected in a group assault. Could a knight without a horse still be called a knight? Despite Tia's young age, she was still a proper mercenary of Lopez, an existence that players said was born for battle. According to her own words, she had participated in many wars between White City and foreign countries. Now, it seemed that what she said was true. Her strategy worked. After the Pegasi were paralyzed, the white-winged knights fell from the sky one after another and fell to the ground in a daze. However, the gold-tier champions would not fall to their deaths from falling dozens of meters in the air. Although the white-winged knights were dizzy from the fall, they quickly got up from the ground and shouted to each other as they regrouped in the forest. Then, they picked up their spears and began to attack from the ground. In the forest, there were about 30 Fireclaw lizard men and the Nightsong tiger waiting for the white-winged knight to come to them. They formed a huge horizontal line with the young knights of the Royal Knights, waiting for the white-winged knights to come to them. Druid Master Wojcik was also at the back. It was obvious that they were planning to hold the cruise knights here. They were buying time. Brando was also seizing the time to filter his cards. He was sacrificing a large number of defeated death guards on the battlefield to gain energy from the furnace of adversity. He then displayed High Spirits. High Spirits, Paradise of Adversity V, for energy, spell, instant, immediately resets all tapped Acronian cards. Enter the graveyard after use. Glory moves forward, morale is high, the soldiers will not retreat in battle. Due to the lightning storm, the overloaded Nightmare Forges immediately returned to normal amidst a series of sizzling noises. The gear ball, a desperate Trojan horse, above his head also returned to normal from its horizontal state and began to rotate. At the same time, since High Spirits was a spell, it could activate the thinking acceleration barrier. So Brando got another chance to draw cards. 3 cards of fate flew out in front of him one by one. Lightning storm, high spirits, energy loss. There was no dawn. Brendel raised his head and saw 2 paladins attacking Seal. Ropar, the Lord of the Fireclaw, stood in front of the young mage in order to protect Brendel, and was slashed in the shoulder. White smoke and hot blood spurted out from the wound. He looked into the distance again. On the other side of the battlefield, Anthony's army was entangled with the Northern Coalition army, while Fleetwood and Buga were fighting with Garlock the Curious and Nicholas the Blazing. Buga the Cross was now slightly inferior to Nicholas, but Fleetwood had the upper hand against Garlock. He was worthy of the title of the kingdom's #1 wizard. And it was at this time that Garlock the Curious suddenly released a disintegration sword spell. Brando didn't even think about it. He raised his hand and used energy loss to directly take away Garlock's disintegration sword. Then he turned his hand and threw it at the Templar Knight in the air. The Templar Knight reacted quickly and immediately pulled back, barely avoiding the disintegration sword. But unfortunately, Brando seemed to have expected it and had already activated Lightning Storm. Once again, he tapped the Nightmare Forges and shrouded the unlucky guy with black lightning. That guy immediately let out a blood-curdling scream as he was hit. Smoke rose from his body as he almost fell from the sky. Brando retracted his attention and then put the last remaining card in his hand, Echelonious Spellweaver, into the field. Echelonious Spellweaver, Paradise of Adversity X, 7 Dark, Creature, Echelonious Spellweaver, Level 25 Elite. Tap, pay 5% of your life, gain 1 light. Eye of Arrow. In an instant, the 4-handed Spellweaver appeared beside Brando, but he didn't even have time to see what the opponent had leveled up to under the golden battle flag. He immediately tapped the card, paid 5% of his life, and then revealed the second card, Glory. The Spellweaver and the Nightmare Forges went into cooldown once again. At this moment, Brando consecutively cast Energy Loss, Lightning Storm, Summon Echelonious Spellweaver, and Glory. 4 spells and 3 spells. His elemental pool instantly became Fire Elemental 6378, Wind Elemental 1751, Earth Elemental 1155, Water Elemental 48, Light Elemental 050, and Dark Elemental 3460. At the same time, 4 consecutive dense white halos spread out from the activated Grimoire of Life. The life that Brando had just lost was immediately replenished. Ropar and the others above his head also recovered. Opposite them, the faces of the 10 paladins of the Holy Cathedral of Fire suddenly turned a little green. They finally realized that if they couldn't kill one of the 4 people in front of them in seconds, then what awaited them might be the end of being exhausted alive. However, Brando didn't care what the enemy thought. Recovery was just an extra benefit for him. More importantly, his thought acceleration barrier was activated 3 times in a row. This time, 9 cards of fates came to his hand. 3 Daybreakers, 2 Echelonious Spellweavers, 1 Death Sentinel, 1 Glory, and 2 Lightning Storm. This is a godly draw. Brando couldn't help but smile. With the increase in the number of cards drawn, the chances of getting the card he wanted also greatly increased. He raised his head and looked at the entire battlefield. He reached out and put 3 Daybreakers in one by one. Daybreakers, Paradise of Adversity 12, 1 Light and Darkness, Spell, Instant, Effect, add 6 light to your mana pool. For every breaking dawn in your graveyard, 3 darkness will be added to your mana pool. Enter the graveyard after use. Dawn, light suddenly appears. The first time, there were 6 light. The second time, there were 6 light and 3 darkness. The third time, there were 6 light and 6 darkness. The light and darkness elemental pools immediately increased to 1850, 4060. In mid-air, William seemed to have finally caught his breath. The deputy commander once again pulled out his flame-shaped sword. Brando noticed this detail and immediately whispered, "Mephistopheles. I'm by your side, master. Protect me." The transvestite vampire nodded slightly. Then Brando placed 2 Echelonious spellweavers in the graveyard and tapped the 3 spellweavers together. Another 3 light elements entered his elemental pool. 2150. But at that moment, William's figure suddenly disappeared from his field of vision. Brando's heart tightened slightly. He knew that the other party could only come for him. He immediately communicated in his mind. "Ropar, the Shire, Medisha." "Yes, Sir Lord." "Sacrifice." Brando hesitated for a moment and ordered. In the sky, the Shire, Ropar, and Medisha, who were fighting with 10 Templar knights, suddenly turned into a bloody light and then gathered around Brando in an instant. With the enhancement of the golden battle flag, Mephistopheles already had the strength of elemental awakening. After the Shire's blood entered her body, she entered the stage of elemental awakening for the first time. The black flame of the secret pattern began to appear on her body. After Ropar's blood entered her body for the second time, she touched the edge of elemental truth. After Medisha's blood entered her body for the third time, she broke through the boundary of elemental truth in one fell swoop. The black secret pattern on her body seemed to come alive, like a circle of black moths flying up and down around the transvestite vampire. Mephistopheles seemed to have sensed something and suddenly took a step forward. Her white palm struck out horizontally and collided with something in the void. With a bang, she flew backward. In the next moment, William's figure appeared in front of Brando. He had obviously exchanged blows with the transvestite vampire and could not help but take a step back. Vampire count. William stared at Mephistopheles with a dark expression, almost squeezing the words out from between his teeth. He was surprised that he had clearly felt the presence of only one elemental awakening aura around Brando, but just now, it seemed to have grown to the middle stage of elemental truth in an instant. Even if he was hiding his strength, this was too ridiculous. The transvestite vampire could not be bothered with him. She turned into a black smoke and flew in front of Brando. She reached out and shielded her master behind her, then stared at this guy vigilantly. P.S. 2 updates. Begging for votes, aww. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 611. You think she can stop me? Williams asked coldly. Brando laughed in his heart because he heard Williams use the pronoun she in Cruz's language instead of he. He thought that this guy was also androgynous. He calmly raised his head to look at Williams and replied, "You can give it a try." With that, Brando raised his hand. A grimoire of life disappeared from the battlefield. The grimoire of life was moved out of the field. All the cards in the graveyard were shuffled back into the deck. At the same time, Brando once again cast Lightning Storm. The Nightmare Forges immediately released a black lightning bolt at Williams, but Williams seemed to be prepared for this. He snorted coldly, "Child's play." He dodged to the left, and at the same time, he appeared on Brando's left side and slashed his sword at Brando's neck. "Brando, be careful, flash strike sword art," Orthless suddenly warned. Brando's heart trembled slightly because the sword was too fast. He could almost feel the coldness of the sword as soon as Orthless finished her words. It was too fast. From dodging to slashing, it seemed that Williams made 2 movements, but in the eyes of ordinary people, these 2 movements were completely out of the ordinary. Everyone present, including Princess Griffin who was behind Brando, seemed to only see the moment Williams slashed his sword. It was as if he was standing there, and the sword should have cut off Brando's neck. It was natural and flawless. Ah! Princess Griffin's face turned pale. But unfortunately, the head that Williams expected to fly high did not exist. On the contrary, he only saw Brando's shadow in front of him gradually fading away. In the next moment, Brando suddenly appeared behind him, and the Halran Gaia in his hand slashed at his shoulder. Clang! Williams did not look back at all, but it was as if he knew that Brando was behind him. He put the sword in his hand behind him and blocked Brando's sword without looking back. The two swords clashed, and sparks flew everywhere. This is 9 Luminary Sword Art. The sword was blocked easily, but the expression on Williams's face completely changed. He was slightly startled and shouted, "How did you?" But before he could finish his words, a faint sound of thunder suddenly came from the ground. William's expression changed as he instinctively sensed danger. He hurriedly jumped up, only to see sharp rock spears suddenly break out of the ground beneath his feet. Crashing sounds could be heard as the rock spears, several meters long, created a rock forest below the Temple Knight's vice-captain. If he hadn't reacted in time, he would have been pierced by the rock spears. Halran Gaia. There was no need for Williams to remind them. Everyone recognized him. Oberwe, Her Royal Highness, and the students of the Royal Cavalry Academy were mostly from noble families. They had more or less heard of the legend of Halran Gaia. As long as it was on the ground, as long as it was on the ground. This was the Halran Gaia. Williams's heart was also cold. Before this, he only knew that Brando was the descendant of the sword Saint Darius, but he did not expect this guy to have so many secrets. Allies with the Nagas and Druids, outstanding strength, and the identity of a summoner. Now, even a dragon descendant and the Halran Gaia had appeared. He felt more and more that Brando was troublesome, and his heart was determined to get rid of him. But the moment this thought flashed in his mind, he saw Brando not far away pick up Princess Erwin and quickly retreat. Of course, he did not forget to look up and grin at him. This taunt. Not good. Williams had a bad premonition. He looked down and saw that there was something sparkling on the topmost rock blade. It was a crystal. Boom! There was a loud sound, and even the ground in the forest shook. A blinding light rose from the top of the black pine forest, and then the strong wind blew the tall pine trees into pieces. In the blink of an eye, the pine trees in the forest at the foot of Anchor Mountain fell, forming a huge pit in the middle. Smoke curled up from the center of the crater. Williams, who was standing at the bottom of the crater, had not been killed by the explosion. However, his body was no longer shiny. His armor was charred black, and his golden-red cloak had been blown to pieces. He looked like a beggar. You. Williams immediately understood what was going on. The other party had obviously predicted that he would come looking for him. He had actually dropped an exploding crystal by his feet. Although he had never seen an exploding crystal before, he could roughly guess what it was based on everything that had happened before. But what he did not understand was how his opponent guessed that he would attack from that side. This was also Orthlis's question. The Wind Elf could not help but say in Brendel's mind, "That move of yours just now was not bad. Back then, when the Wind Empress fought with Gretel, she often used the 9 Luminary Sword Art to dodge his Flash Strike Sword Art. But how did you guess that he would attack from your left side?" "Because he is left-handed," Brando replied. Others might not know Williams, but he was familiar with him. In order to avenge the princess, he had fought with this guy many times. You are so cunning, Brando. That is because you taught me well. I did not teach you this. There is an old saying in the 9 Phoenixes, what the master teaches depends on the individual. Brando smiled. Orthlis was speechless. Brando was arguing with Orthlis, but it did not mean that he did not take Williams seriously. In fact, the explosion had just occurred. He immediately put down the princess and quickly pulled back. "Mr. Brando!" Princess Griffin called out. She saw Brando and Williams leave the crowd one after another. The deputy commander of the Sanctum Knight Regiment quickly caught up with the former, but this time, the Mephistopheles blocked him. At the same time, Brando once again put down the third card, Glory. Echelonius Spellweaver and the Nightmare Forges went into reset again. At the same time, the filtering cards of Lightning Storm and Glory allowed him to draw 2 more Daybreak cards. But what surprised him even more was, he also drew back and rolled his Holy Ring, which was shuffled back into the deck. It's here. Brando looked up. Williams had already swept away the Mephistopheles, blocking him with his sword. The female vampire crashed into the forest like a meteor, raising a cloud of dust. The peak of the law, the enlightenment, the gap between the two was still too big. Williams withdrew his sword and looked at Brando. There was no one between the two anymore. At the same time, Enrich, who was in mid-air, finally reached the end of her life under the siege of 10 Sanctum Knight. 3 sharp swords pierced the chest of the vampire princess almost at the same time, but at the same time, Enrich used the last of her strength to stab the neck of the female Sanctum Knight who was caught off guard. Under everyone's shocked gaze. A rain of blood. Both Enrich's and the Sanctum Knight's blood slowly descended from midair. The second one. The vampire princess replied calmly. The soul flame in Enrich's eyes seemed to fade in an instant, and then she closed her eyes. Her skin was as white as frost, and she was quiet like a real princess. 9 Sanctum Knight passed over her falling body. Higher up in the sky, the fleet of the Holy Cathedral of Fire was engaged in a fierce battle with the Black Tower mages. Arrows, explosions, and even magic were intertwined between the Black Square Tower and the 3 warships. The layers of magic shields that shrouded the tower and the warships were blooming with the brightest and most dazzling light. Almost every moment, countless attacks exploded on top of it. The Wyvern cavalry of the Southern Legion once again joined the battle. No-sided tightly held onto the dragon spear on his saddle. The wind and rain accompanied him, and beside him, more Wyvern Knight were soaring in the sky. On the back of each Wyvern was a blurry face. He only vaguely remembered that it belonged to someone from the Southern Legion. No name, but history was written. The crew's fleet immediately adjusted their direction again. Bright flames exploded between the Wyvern Knight, and giant beasts fell from the sky. But even more Wyvern Knight passed through the dense barrage. No-sided screamed and ordered the Wyvern Knight to climb up. The crew's fleet had no choice but to open the green magic shield and let the Wyverns pass over them. The first wave of Wyvern Knight attacks immediately threw a fist-sized exploding crystal. The dazzling light created a pure white halo in the air. The frigate Taylor's protective shield flickered 10 times before it shattered like glass. Then, a ball of sparks exploded on the side of the frigate. The floating battleship immediately tilted to one side. A set of magic-powered turbines on the ship quickly generated electric arcs and then exploded due to overload. Then, the ammunition room exploded as well. The entire battleship spewed out a huge ball of fire in the air. It began to roll over and slowly descend. Finally, it fell into the formation of the Northern Alliance army. The other frigate, Jigsaw, was in a slightly better condition, but there were bright flames on the ship. Only the Empire's flagship, Perrin, was still standing strong in the wind and rain. The flagship's magic shield almost didn't move under the impact of the exploding crystal. It was just that under the siege of the Black Tower mages, it was also in danger. But it was at this time, suddenly, there was a throbbing roar in the clouds, as if a giant beast was passing through the clouds. On the Black Tower, Bunide, the leader of the Highland Knight Regiment, looked up and stared in that direction. Then, he saw a red dot. Then, more red dots appeared on the sky. 1, 2, 3, more than 20 red circles opened up under the black clouds at the same time. In the rain, the shadow of a giant golden red ship was gradually transforming into reality. A huge fleet was entering the battlefield. Finally, after the vanguard fleet of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, their main fleet finally arrived on the battlefield. All the mages on the Black Tower couldn't help but stop their spell movements at that moment. In the air, the Wyvern Knights of the Southern Legion were also in a panic and were flying back. The second fleet of the Cruz Empire, Canolia, entered the battlefield. Before Brando noticed what was happening above his head, 9 Holy Cathedral Knight had landed beside him. In front of him, Williams, the deputy leader of the Knight Regiment of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, held his sword horizontally, and the golden lines of law once again extended from behind him. He moved forward, and wherever he passed, there was a sea of fire. "Descendant of Darius, do you have anything to say before you die?" Williams, Brando suddenly said seriously, if the Holy Cathedral of Fire could really keep its word, maybe the result wouldn't be like this. But if you were given a chance to start over, I wonder if you would still choose to do so. It's too late to beg for mercy. The deputy leader of the Holy Cathedral Knight Regiment replied with a cold face. No, Brando smiled, I just want to say, good luck. What did he mean? Williams was slightly stunned. At that moment, Brando put down 2 more Daybreakers. Light Elemental Pool, 3350 Dark Elemental Pool, 4360. He duplicated the Nightmare Forges for the 4th time, and at the same time, the counter on the Impasse Trojan Horse finally reached 40. Brando tapped the Impasse Trojan Horse, and then the Impasse Trojan Horse's ability, when tapped and the requirement is met, move the opponent's card into the battlefield, was activated. And now, Brando's opponent cards were Glorious Martyr, Vampire Baron, 2 Death Sentinels, and Sacred Grimoire of Life. A golden sword slashed straight, but Enrolda's holy ring lit up again. The cycle is complete. Brando smiled again under the pure white light shield. Good luck, Williams. Accelerated thinking was activated, and then he began the next round of drawing cards. P.S. Begging for votes. Begging for votes. And continue to recommend Red North's Golden Throne. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:12. 2 High Spirits, Fire Djinn, 2 Glorious Trumpeters, Unicorn Knight, Flow Loss, Sea Wave Gem, and Daybreak. In addition, there were Sunblade, Death Sentinel, Echelonious Spellweaver, and 2 Lightning Storm in his hand. Once the cycle was completed, the progress of the Paradise of Adversity began to accelerate. The flame sword in William's hand slashed on Enroldo's holy ring, creating sparks on the platinum arc of light. At the same time, a glorious martyr wearing a white robe, a sun crown, and a golden staff entered the field. Under the golden battle flag, a level 62, Elemental Enlightenment, glorious martyr entered the field. The deputy commander of the Holy Cathedral Knight had to retreat, but before that, he still killed the Vampire Baron who had just entered the field. At the same time, Death Sentinels began to appear on the battlefield in large numbers. In the valley, the Northern Coalition army began to waver and retreat for the first time. Brando displayed high spirits. Desperate Trojan Horse, Echelonious Spellweaver, and Nightmare Furnace Construct were reset. The next card, Daybreak, entered the field. Echelonious Spellweaver entered the field, tapped. Light Elemental Pool, 2450, previously, only 8 Nightmare Furnaces were duplicated, and Roldo's Holy Ring cost 10, Dark Elemental Pool, 4960, 2 Daybreak cards in the graveyard, pay 10 water. Sea Wave Gem entered the field. Then, Sea Wave Gem's ability was activated, and the Glorious Trumpeters entered the field. Holding a golden horn, a young girl wearing a Greek-style white linen dress and a laurel crown appeared on the field. This was the 7th card of the Paradise of Adversity. She was only level 49, upper gold, under the golden battle flag, but her special ability was to tap and pay 1 Dark Elemental Pool, and choose any creature card from the holder's hand to enter the field. Brando ordered her to blow the trombone, and the second Glorious Trumpeter appeared on the field. She blew the horn again, and the unicorn knight Metasha appeared on the field. "My lord!" The silver fairy princess shouted happily when she saw Brando, because she knew that her return to the field meant that the cycle of the paradise of adversity had been completed. Brando smiled at her. Everything had happened in the blink of an eye. As soon as Williams retreated, the Nine-Temple Knight immediately surrounded Brando. However, with a flash of fire, the infernal giant spirit appeared between them and Brando. Fire element pool. For 378. Before everyone's expression changed, the unlucky giant spirit charged into the crowd and self-destructed. Brando could almost hear its grumbling before it died. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't have any large creatures to summon. If he did, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Once the desperate Trojan horse cycle was completed, these cruise people would be sent out of the country. The sound of an explosion rang out in the forest. 3 of the 9 Knight Templars were sent flying, and the remaining 6 were covered in dust. Brando sacrificed the Fireclaw Buglers and Fireclaw Spearmen. Because Ropar wasn't on the battlefield, these lizardmen's strength had dropped by a level or more. They were no longer suitable for this battlefield. The power of the transvestite vampire rose to the upper levels of the elemental truth in an instant. This time, her strength was only 1 level away from Williams. When she appeared on the battlefield again, even the moths flying around her had turned into golden patterns. Bang 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 bang. The sound of hands clashing rang out, and 2 Temple Knight were sent flying. However, after the Mephistopheles and Williams exchanged an attack, the 2 of them flew back. Williams took 3 steps back, and Mephistopheles took 10 steps back. Their beautiful faces were flushed. However, Williams looked up and found that he had been pushed more than 30 meters away by Brando. He had a vague hunch that he couldn't retreat anymore, or he would lose his last chance. In fact, that was exactly the case. Brando placed Lightning Storm, then High Spirits, and then Lightning Storm. He didn't care if the spell hit. He just needed them to be added to the list of filtering cards. He once again used Energy Loss to strip a protective spell from Garlock and threw it to the Mephistopheles. 2 High Spirits, 2 Lightning Storms, Energy Loss, Daybreak, 6 spells. At the same time, there were Echelonious Spellweaver, 2 Death Sentinels, Glorious Martyr, Vampire Baron, Sea Wave Gem, 2 Buglers, Unicorn Knight, Fire Djinn, and 15 spells. The 2 Grimoires of Life that reappeared on the battlefield flashed with a pure white light. Such a spectacle appeared on the battlefield. No matter how powerful the attack was, as long as it hit the soldiers of the princess's army, the wounds would heal instantly. Even the steel swords were squeezed out of the regenerated muscles. The morale of the Northern Coalition army completely collapsed at this moment, and they began to retreat slowly. Brando moved a Grimoire of Life out of the field and shuffled all the cards in the graveyard back into the deck. Then he began to draw cards. 18 cards. 3 High Spirits, 4 Lightning Storms, Vampire Baron, Sea Wave Gem, Glorious Trumpeter, Fire Djinn, Highland Squire, Wolf Den, Fireclaw Spearman, and 4 Daybreak. Brando raised his head, and his eyes flashed with an unusually bright light. He smiled at Williams, revealing his white teeth. At that moment, he was like a ferocious beast that chose to devour people. 18 cards, 11 spells, which meant that he would be able to grab 33 cards next time. This was the core meaning of the Paradise of Adversity. As long as the accelerated thinking was on the field, the Planeswalker's cycle would get faster and faster. There was no limit. In the end, the speed at which he cast spells would only be related to the speed at which he cut cards, and nothing else. This was the storm. Tap the impasse Trojan horse. The Grimoire of Life was moved into the field again. This was an endless cycle. The killer move of the Paradise of Adversity. Williams finally found the problem. He killed the Vampire Baron, Andrique, and Ropar again. His men also killed the Fireclaw Spearman and the Rune Summoner. But it was meaningless, because they were gradually getting away from Brando. The opponents they killed often appeared on the battlefield in less than a second. They were so fast and varied that it made one's hair stand on end. Everyone in the forest was stunned. There was only one shocking thought in everyone's mind: could it be that he didn't need to use his mental strength to summon creatures? But there was another possibility. In history, Saint Tossel the Wind was famous for being a dual cultivator of magic and martial arts. It was said that she had endless magic, which was why she could create a swordsmanship like the 9 Luminaries' sword art. And Brando also knew the 9 Luminaries' sword art. Could it be that he really received her complete inheritance? Ever since Williams shouted the name of the swordsmanship, everyone couldn't help but have this thought. But this wasn't enough to make them waver. What really shocked everyone was that Brando stood there alone, and in front of him were 10 truly peerless powerhouses. 9 Knight of the Holy Cathedral, and one of them was at the peak of the lower realm. But Brando fought against 10 of them alone, and they were forced to retreat. This scene, every detail, was destined to depict the birth of this miracle. It would be forever engraved in the hearts of everyone present, as the nightmare of his enemies, and a legend in the mouths of others. Williams had a deep understanding of this. He found that not only was he unable to get close to Brando, but even if he attacked from afar, that nightmarish white light would flash, and Enrolda's holy ring made him return without any success. He almost wanted to cry, but no tears came out. In fact, the vampire girl he was fighting was becoming stronger and stronger. Previously, he could casually sweep her into the forest with his sword. But now, he could only fight with her. He could faintly feel that she was about to break through the peak of the elemental enlightenment and step into the peak of the lower realm. Was there any justice in this world? He had witnessed her transformation from elemental activation to elemental enlightenment, and then from elemental enlightenment to the peak of the lower realm with his own eyes. He finally understood that it wasn't some hidden strength at all, but that she was becoming stronger bit by bit through the battle. It was a pity that Williams didn't understand the existence of a fighting race in this world.
Otherwise, he would have thought that the Mephistopheles were the legendary fighting race. The more they were defeated, the braver they became, and the more they fought, the stronger they became. Of course, that was just an illusion. The real reason was that Brando was constantly sacrificing non-black creatures. The bonuses of the 3 combat counters were similar to the Wolf's Den card attached to the Shire. Each experience counter now seemed to give a fixed amount of experience. Although the Mephistopheles' lives were becoming slower and slower, they couldn't stand up to Brando's accelerated cycle. Finally, the vampire girl entered the peak of the lower realm at that moment. A powerful aura rose from the battlefield. All the strong people on the battlefield couldn't help but raise their eyebrows. Someone actually broke through on the battlefield. The Mephistopheles let out a long howl. To Brando, the sound was very soft, but to the Northern Alliance army, it shook their hearts. A pair of demonic wings suddenly grew from the Mephistopheles' back, and silver bloodlines appeared on their foreheads, the family seal. Enough. Williams couldn't take it anymore and couldn't help but roar. It wasn't that he didn't try to kill the Mephistopheles, but Brando casually sacrificed the glorious martyr, making all his efforts futile. Moreover, under the healing effect of the grimoire of life, how difficult was it to kill a peak existence of the lower realm? The commander of the Knight Templar finally understood that he had already reached a dead end. He suddenly understood the meaning of Brando's gaze. His heart was cold. There was still one more chance. At that moment, William's aura suddenly changed, and the golden threads around him suddenly turned pure silver, with platinum flames burning on them. The Mephistopheles in front of him raised their heads and looked at the deputy commander of the Templar Knight Templar in surprise. Because in her senses, Williams didn't seem to exist. No, he shouldn't be above this boundary. The ultimate realm. Brando, be careful. Orthless suddenly shouted in his mind, Flash strike. Flash strike. Among the three swords, the 9 luminaries' sword behind the wind represented the supreme magic sword. It used mana to reflect multiple shadows, giving people the illusion of a fast sword. But in fact, the fastest sword among the three swords was the Flame King Gretel's Flash Strike. What was the principle behind the Flash Strike that allowed it to reach a speed faster than the 9 luminaries' sword behind the wind? Brando had asked Orthless this question more than once. But today, he finally knew the answer. Because at that moment, he felt his lines of law vibrate. It was space. The Flash Strike actually pierced the boundary of space with a physical sword, so that the next attack could appear in any position. It was so similar to the nature of his space. The next moment, Brando saw Williams appear beside him. His eyes had turned silver, looking at him coldly. He also looked at him. He had Enroldo's holy ring in his hand, so he wasn't afraid of any of Williams' attacks. But Brando was wrong about one thing: Williams did not attack him. It was just that suddenly, a majestic aura spread between heaven and earth, as if endless power was extending in all directions. In the blink of an eye, there was no boundary between heaven and earth. Everything was gray. The ultimate plane. This time, it was finally Brando's turn to be surprised. Williams had hardened his heart to use the secret technique of the Holy Cathedral of Fire to burn his life. This might be the only chance for him to step into the ultimate realm in his life. From then on, this cruise's former genius swordsman would have no room to grow. He did not hesitate to make such a choice. As expected of an expert at the peak of the law, he was so decisive and determined. Brando couldn't help but sigh. Williams pulled him into the ultimate plane. In the opponent's domain, except for the cards in his hand, all of his summons were isolated outside. This was indeed troublesome. His deck in hand only had 1/3 of the cards left, but the real problem was that because the desperate Trojan horse and the Grimoire of Life were left outside, the cycle was broken. Although it was only temporary, it was fatal for Brando. It had to be said that Williams was a battle-hardened swordsman after all. Although he was a little brainless when it came to dealing with people, he was born with a keen sense of battle. As soon as he made his move, he caught Brando's weakest link. That was himself, the Planeswalker himself. Williams slashed at him with his sword, and the light of Enroldo's holy ring flashed again. But the deputy commander of the Holy Cathedral Knight Regiment did not give up and slashed again. This time, Brando's figure shattered into countless pieces under his sword like a reflection in a mirror. 9 luminaries sword art. Williams was not surprised but delighted. He could not help but laugh wildly. Haha, you really can't keep using that spell. I'd like to see how many times 9 luminaries sword art can save you. He was talking about Enroldo's holy ring. But Brando looked at this guy with some pity. If Williams wanted to fight him one-on-one outside, he would naturally be beaten like a dog. But this guy was driven to desperation, and had actually dragged him into the extreme planes. No, this was not the real ultimate plane. After reaching the ultimate realm, it was Williams' personal domain. In other words, this was a world where his laws were maximized. In this world, his laws were all-encompassing. This was his home ground, a world weaved by Williams's laws. Williams. Brando could not help but sigh. The deputy commander of the Holy Cathedral Knight Regiment was slightly startled.
Then he saw Brando's eyes suddenly burning with black flames, followed by his hair and hands. In the blink of an eye, a pair of wings burning with abyssal flames spread out from behind Brando. And Brando's voice became hoarse and deep. You really are an idiot. William's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This is impossible. The fool. The fool. The inheritance of the darkness dragon. He pointed his sword at Brando and screamed in disbelief. You are the darkness dragon. No. Brando shook his head. I am Brando. Go to hell. William's face was pale and he roared, heresy. He raised the long sword in his hand and was about to attack Brando. But his movements suddenly froze. Brendel took out a short, shiny, 3-inch-long object that shone with a golden light. This was the relic that Brando took from Amon, the god-slaying magic-breaking cone, a consumable artifact that prohibited all elements, magic, and unnatural forces. And now, he was going to return it to the Holy Cathedral of Fire. In another way. No, this is impossible. Williams could hardly believe what he saw. How could there be such a coincidence in this world? Legend had it that the god-slaying magic-breaking cone made by Fanzan was the nemesis of all laws, and its only weakness was that it had to be hit for it to take effect. In the hands of a powerhouse of the same level, it was not inferior to a nuclear weapon in the magical world. But in Brando's hands, such a thing was hardly a deterrent to a true powerhouse. Williams was an exception. The man's face was ashen, and cold sweat was dripping down his forehead. This was his home ground, the law realm. He should have had the absolute advantage, but now, it seemed like he was the meat on someone's chopping block. Because of this was his extreme planes. A world that was weaved by his threads of law. But it was also for the same reason. He could not escape. That is possible, Brando replied. You chose to die. Saying so, he casually stabbed the magic-breaking cone into the gray ground. The golden cone instantly hit Williams' threads of law. Ah! Williams suddenly let out an earth-shattering scream. The entire world seemed to tremble. Brando stood up and drew Halran Gaia from behind him. He felt the world gradually crumbling, and Williams' elemental power was disintegrating. You only have one chance to live, Williams. Brando raised his sword, which was burning with the same black flames, and asked coldly, in the last holy war, what is the real mystery of the November War? Williams held his head in pain. The laws in his mind were in a mess, as if they would explode at any time. But even so, he still gritted his teeth and looked at Brando with red eyes and roared, You want to know? Dream on. I will never tell you. Then please die. This sword. The world was fading, and the outside gradually returned to the scenery of the Anchor Forest. It is for the princess.
Brando's sword moved forward, and the sharp blade of Halran Gaia and the burning black flames pierced through William's body. The sacred swordsman of the Holy Cathedral of Fire screamed and raised his head. The silver light in his eyes quickly faded, and only a look of disbelief was left. At that moment, the world of Extreme Planes completely collapsed. P.S. 5K, please vote, vote, vote. Also, I recommend Dazed Fish's Heart Hunting royalty. Well, speaking of which, many people in the group already know this book is from Chidian. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 613. The gray sky was disintegrating above his head, like oats dissolving into milk. Brando stood in the middle of the plains, looking at the corpse of the vice-captain of the Holy Cathedral of Fire's Night Regiment. The black flames on his body were gradually fading away, like black butterflies dancing in the air. How was it? Orthless suddenly asked. That was close. Brando gasped softly. The last exchange with Williams made him deeply feel the difference in strength between him and a true powerhouse. At the last moment, even if Williams did not retaliate, he would not have been able to break through the vice-captain's defense without activating the Fool's Frenzy. In the end, he still had to rely on his own strength to save his life. But in any case, fortunately, he won, and that was enough. After a pause, Brando suddenly asked, Lady Orthless, you knew that Kelsey's deck had flaws, right? Orthless smiled gently. Some things will only leave a deep impression if you experience it yourself. Many years of war have taught me this truth. It is very difficult for a new recruit to transform into a veteran without experiencing setbacks, young man. Brando felt a pang in his heart. The moment Williams pulled him into the extreme plains, the absolute law of planeswalkers was broken. Medisha, the Shire, and the other summoned creatures were all isolated from the world. This meant that even if a cycle was formed, Kelsey's deck still had flaws. From the final result, he had won this battle by luck. But fortunately, it was Williams and not other stronger opponents who discovered this flaw, so the one lying on the ground now was not him. This meant that he still had a chance to make up for it. But the reason he asked Orthless was because he suddenly remembered that the enemy of the four saints was the darkness dragon Odin. Elaine told him that Odin was also a powerful planeswalker, but since the four saints were able to defeat Odin, it meant that planeswalkers were not above this world. Orthless seemed to know what he was thinking and replied softly, "It is said that every planeswalker pursues a perfect cycle. Under almost perfect conditions, the law can form a world of its own. In this cycle, the power of a planeswalker is invincible. Unfortunately, no one has been able to do this." Brando knew what she was trying to say. Odin didn't do it back then, or he wouldn't have lost to them. Odin's deck is total darkness. That deck is much more aggressive than the deck in your hand. The specialty of that deck is to transform all elements into the power of darkness, and in turn, the power of darkness is his home ground. Can you imagine the feeling of fighting the dark dragon while he gets stronger and stronger while you get weaker and weaker? That sounds a bit like Madara. Don't interrupt. The undead of Madara were once his subordinates and admirers. Orthless replied, "Odin doesn't have as many creature cards as Tumen and Kelsey.
All his cards are artifacts, abilities, spells, and barriers. Furthermore, his strength was incomparably powerful, so he didn't have that pitiful little weakness of yours. However, we still managed to defeat him in the end. How did you do it?" Brando couldn't help but be curious. She was a little proud, because his core power is transformation. He must have used the artifacts and spells on the field to transform our power. His cards can quickly form a cycle, much faster than yours. As long as he starts, he can form a cycle. Then, all that's left is to constantly filter the cards to counterattack our attacks. And every time he counterattacks, he can draw out the dark elements from the cards to continue his cycle. Wait, you mean he doesn't have land cards? Land cards are the weakness of a planeswalker. Why would he leave such a flaw? Little guy, do you really think that the land cards in your world won't be attacked? Have you forgotten how you entered William's world? He just stepped into this realm. The real extreme planes is a complete world, which is a world where a person's law is maximized. And the planeswalker's land cards are in his extreme planes. Ah. Brando couldn't help but cry out. That's why having land cards is a weakness in itself. We can't attack your land cards directly like a real planeswalker. But we can destroy them violently. Orthless continued, Odin is a genius. He designed a deck that doesn't need land cards. But unfortunately, it also planted a hidden danger. In the final battle, Fanzan constantly dismantled his core spells, causing his elements to break, giving us an opportunity. You can counter the cards of fate? No, although we can do it, it's not that simple. Because the spells that counter his spells will also be countered and transformed by his spells, Orthless said awkwardly, we used a clumsy but effective method. Before he could counter our spells, we dismantled our own attacks. Because he didn't have land cards, the elements that Odin could use to activate his deck were very limited. If his counterattack didn't get replenished, the elements would dry up. Because of this, we finally won after paying a huge price. Brando was stunned. He didn't think that the result would be so simple. But he knew that this was only what it sounded like. In reality, it was probably something else. The Darkness Dragon's strength surpassed the four saints, and they had to attack each other to dismantle each other's spells. One could only imagine how tragic the battle was. Brando only knew that in the final battle, the Allied forces lost nearly 4/5 of their forces. Those who survived later became heroes. His heart wavered as he listened, but he couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. He didn't think that even a powerful being like the Darkness Dragon couldn't escape the fate of defeat. He thought that planeswalkers were invincible. But he was also looking forward to it.
What planeswalkers pursued was perfection. This was what Tumen had told him. Now that Orthless had asked him about it again, was there really such a thing as an invincible deck? Orthless looked at him and couldn't help but laugh. Come on, little guy. You should have realized it by now. How can you be a real planeswalker if you use other people's cards? Whether it's a planeswalker or a saint, the ultimate goal of a first-rate expert is to open up their own law. Brando nodded. He looked up and saw that Williams's extreme planes had almost completely disappeared. He stretched out his hand, and his palm was stained with a few drops of cold rain. The wind and rain from Anchor Mountain were seeping into this world, and the sounds of the two armies fighting became clearer. Indeed, it was time for him to walk his own path. He had been hesitant, but it was also because of the situation. Erwin was in a precarious situation. Choosing his own deck meant that he had to start from scratch. By the time he became a planeswalker, the kingdom would probably no longer exist. But now, it was different. Ampere Seal already had a different history. Her Royal Highness didn't compromise with anyone in this history. Erwin also had a glimmer of hope. He already had the ability to control everything that was left. Williams's world completely collapsed, and the sound of the wind and rain outside became real again. But at that moment, his figure once again returned to the torrential rain. Everyone in the forest saw the deputy commander of the paladins lying on the ground, and Brendel standing beside him with Halran Gaia in his hand. There was a moment of silence in the rain. From when Williams pulled Brando into the extreme plains to when Brando killed him and reappeared, only a moment had passed in the outside world. Princess Griffine, Amandine, Metisha, the Shire, and everyone else's hearts had experienced a journey from hell to heaven. My lord. Amandine seemed to have lost all her strength, and couldn't help but slowly lean back against the black pine tree. Mr. Brando. Metisha's joy was like the sound of a skylark, piercing through the forest. The Shire stood in the rain, and a faint smile appeared on his face. It was the same sincere smile that came from the heart when he and Brando went to steal the priceless treasures of Duke Grenoir's in Fortress Reden. Andrique snorted softly. The worry on the vampire's face seemed to have just disappeared, and then it turned into the warmest and happiest smile. My lord. The tall Ropar did not speak, and the lizard man lord's eyes were only filled with determination. He believed in his lord, just like he believed in the most outstanding hero of his clan. Because heroes would never disappoint the people who trusted them. The mercenaries of Lopez cheered in unison, and the red-haired girl let out a long sigh, and silently drew a cross on her chest. Among the crowd, only Princess Griffine closed her eyes, her eyelashes trembling slightly. At that moment, she finally felt that Lady Martha did not abandon the kingdom. Just like a mother who always tenderly watched her children, watching them hold on to the noble glory and faith that belonged to them for generations. The rain was still falling. There were only 7 Night Temple left, and their hands and feet were cold. They did not know how to accept the reality in front of them. They had lost their comrade, and even their vice-captain had died here. The noblest blood of the Cruz people quietly wandered in this remote mountain range that they did not even know the name of. Above the clouds, the flames reflected each other, and the square tower of the Black Tower Wizard was torn apart in the violent explosion, and then fell down into the mountains of Erech. The dragon cavalry of the Southern Legion was organizing the final charge, and under the curtain of rain, there were explosions. Under the golden light, the kingdom's Night Temple paid the greatest amount of courage. The tailor withdrew from the battle. The Iris withdrew from the battle. The Ralbo's cabin caught fire, and then exploded. The Vivonley crashed. No Sight felt the wound under his armor was tearing open, and the viper he was sitting on had a huge hole in its shoulder, and its tail and wings were also scorched. The pain tortured every inch of his nerves, but he knew that he could not take a step back. The battle between the Temple Knight and Brando's group would determine the outcome of the battle. Before that, they had to stop the Cruz's fleet from covering the central position of the princess's army. But the Southern Legion had already done their best. Without reinforcements, it seemed that the outcome of the battle was still far away. Although the Northern Coalition army on the ground was slowly retreating, the soldiers of the Holy Cathedral of Fire in the sky were like endless meteors, outlining a nightmarish scene in the rain. A row of crisp sounds rang in his ears. It was the volley of gunners on the Perrin's cannon deck. No side felt a huge force hit his chest, but he held on to the reins tightly. On the side, a few more comrades fell from the sky. "We've done our best." He looked up, as if hoping to see the bright light of the loop of trade winds. But the storm made the entire outer sea of Ampere Seal obscure. The sky and the earth merged together, and it was dark under the clouds, and the sunlight could barely penetrate the dark clouds. There was no light in the darkness. No Sidon narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, there seemed to be a flash of light in the distant darkness. In an instant, the already weakened magic shield of the Perlon seemed to have been torn open, and a ball of fire lit up on the flagship of the Curluts. Explosions, flames, and broken pieces of wood rose from the deck. "It's a bombardment." Nosidus seemed to have a shock and woke up.
How could there be a bombardment? Was it an accidental injury by the crews? No, he suddenly remembered the flash of light. He turned his head stiffly in that direction. The crews did not seem to believe that they were attacked. But the second fleet of Canolia was indeed suffering from an unexpected artillery bombardment from the flank, and the bright flames of the explosions crisscrossed in the sky. The first round of bombardment fell on the 7 frigates on the flank. Especially the Bellagio at the edge, due to the lack of defense, almost all of the bombardment was absorbed by the side armor, and the entire warship disintegrated in mid-air, turning into gorgeous fireworks. The bombardment continued. An unfamiliar fleet was entering the battlefield from the direction of St. White Bay, and fierce artillery fire roared out from this fleet, enveloping the entire flank of the second fleet of Canolia like a storm. The crews lost nearly 1/10 of their ships in an instant. The huge fleet tried to turn around clumsily, and they seemed to have finally realized who their opponent was. It was indeed a fleet that was not inferior to theirs. The Erewhon people bought these battleships from the Wind Elves, and within 20 years, they spent countless manpower and financial resources to build this fleet. It could be said that this was the only army in this ancient kingdom that had the aura of this era. The first fleet of the Erewhon royal family was slowly sailing forward in the clouds. P.S. Well, that idiot Blackie insisted that I change the recommendation, saying that I have too few paragraphs. Just send that idiot. Oh no, I wrote the introduction again. Try using the following chapters. Anyway, it's not included in the word count. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chijin.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.
Chapter 6:14. In the sky, Awin's royal first fleet was biting tightly onto the Curluts' fleet. The Ptolemy-class first-level battleships purchased from the Wind Elves were far more mobile than the Pelin-class battleships of Canolia's fleet that entered service 20 years ago. However, the Curluts had a stronger will to fight and the quality of their personnel. Although it was only a local fleet, it undoubtedly showed the spirit of the Empire. The two sides opened fire in the sky and attacked each other. From time to time, there were battleships that turned into fireballs and fell down. However, when Brando's Wind Spirit Drake joined the battle, the crew's people finally showed signs of weakness. The Perrin-class Asha battleship was the first to withdraw from the battle. The Wind Spirit Drake launched a suicide attack on the battleship's magic shield and then used its mana to burn the battleship's energy source. The Asha battleship, which lost its power, plunged into the Northern Coalition army and caused a lot of casualties. Soon, a cannonball from the Erewhon frigate, Corinth, penetrated the magic shield and hit the stern of another flagship, the Perrin. The captain and the first mate were killed on the spot. The Curlutzian fleet fell apart and had to flee in all directions. When the fleet retreated, the Northern Coalition army on the ground also began to flee like ants. The mournful sound of the horn pierced through the curtain of rain. On the other side, under Brando's gaze, the 7 paladin knights put down their weapons one by one. There was no chance of winning on the battlefield. Their resistance was meaningless. Soon, the whole battlefield quieted down. Only the sound of the rain and the wailing of the wounded could be heard. Brando finally breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that all the strength in his body had been sucked out. He sat down on the rock behind him. Maynard was ordering the survivors to build a simple shelter so that the wounded could be moved in. Most of the wounded were soldiers of the Northern Coalition Army. A small number of them were Crew's people. Because of the sacred Book of Life, there were almost no wounded on the princess side. Princess Griffin quickly found him. "Mr. Brando, should we continue to pursue the Crew's fleet?" The half-fairy princess asked hesitantly. The Crew's people had 12 main fleets. Canolia was just a local fleet, similar to the Ampere Seal Navy. In her opinion, there was no need to continue the pursuit. Instead, it would anger the Crew's people. "We have to continue the pursuit, Your Highness. Letting them rejoin the Northern Coalition Army will be a new problem." Brando knew why the princess was hesitating and immediately explained, "It's best to order Count Janelesu to chase them all the way to Ampere Seal and completely annihilate this fleet." His words exposed his intention to take advantage of the situation to take Ampere Seal. Even Princess Griffin was shocked.
In fact, it was not that she had not discussed this issue with Oberway and Austin. Now that the Northern Coalition Army had been defeated, and the Ampere Seal Harbor Guards had suffered heavy losses, it was reasonable for them to take advantage of the victory to take Ampere Seal. With Ampere Seal, a stronghold that connected the north and south, and then attack the north, they would be in a position without any worries in the war between the two sides. But the only problem was the attitude of the Crew's people. Annihilating a Kurlutz fleet and defeating their fleet were two different concepts. If the Kurlutz Empire were to be dragged into this war for the sake of Ampere Seal, it would seem that the gains would not make up for the losses. Thinking of this, she could not help but stare at Brando with her beautiful silver eyes, as if she wanted to see through the man's thoughts. He seemed to have never taken the Crew's empire seriously. Without even thinking about it, he wanted to annihilate the entire Canolia fleet. This was a bit too bold. Even the kingdom's lone wolf, her teacher, could not help but be cautious when talking about the Crew's people. After all, they were living under the shadow of the lion. Being too ostentatious would lead to a disaster. Of course, Brando was aware of Princess Erwin's concerns, but he felt that these concerns were a bit funny. "Your Highness, you can rest assured that the Crew's people will not dare to trouble us because of this." "Why?" Princess Griffin frowned. She felt that this was a bit too blindly optimistic. "Because of the Wind Elves." "So that's why." But she shook her head. "Mr. Brando, the Wind Elf support for us is not as great as you think. If the Crew's people were just using the North to punish us, and did not really intend to attack Erwin, I'm afraid that the Soul Court of Saint Ossel would not be able to do anything." "That's because they won't get the benefits they deserve," Brando replied. He shook his head and sighed. After all, Erwin is a country under the Holy Cathedral of Fire. This civil strife is also an internal matter under the jurisdiction of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. How can the Holy Cathedral of Wind intervene? The 4 holy cathedrals have a tacit understanding on this. Exactly. Her Highness nodded. In that case, let's just announce that the new Erwin has joined the Holy Cathedral of Wind. Brando replied matter-of-factly. This. But. Princess Griffin was immediately stunned. The look in her eyes was as if Brando was a monster. She simply did not know why he would have such an idea. After all, the people of Erwin were descendants of the Flame King, and it was also a human country. Psychologically, all the people of Erwin were more willing to belong to the Holy Cathedral of Fire than the Holy Cathedral of Wind. Therefore, it was not that the nobles did not think of relying on the Holy Cathedral of Wind.
At most, they wanted to rely on the Holy Cathedral of Wind to contain the strength of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. It was like bargaining, but in the end, they still had to rely on the Holy Cathedral of Fire. However, no one would have thought that Brando was a freak. As half of a transmigrator, he did not have any sense of belonging to the so-called four holy cathedrals. In his previous life, he had lived under the jurisdiction of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, the Holy Cathedral of Wind, and the Holy Cathedral of Light. From the perspective of a player, he preferred Fanzin's Holy Cathedral of Light. At least until they stabbed him in the back in the game. In this life, Orthless of the Holy Cathedral of Wind had been accompanying him on adventures and growth. Speaking of which, compared to the Holy Cathedral of Wind, he had a deeper affection for it. Brando quietly looked at the princess who had a hesitant look on her face. The look in Princess Griffin's eyes quickly became clear. She raised her head and looked at Brando seriously. I admit that this is a choice, but we will only consider it at the last moment. Is that okay, Mr. Brando? Brando nodded. He knew that not only Her Highness the Princess, but also the nobles of Erewhon would find it difficult to accept this proposal for a while. Change needed time and opportunity, and he roughly understood that Her Highness wanted to use this as a bargaining chip for the last negotiation with Cruz. She was very likely to succeed. Erewhon's geographical location was too important. To the south of it was the endless wilderness and the Black Forest, and it was also the pass to monitor the movements of Madara. For the Empire, Erewhon was not only a source of resources, but also a natural buffer zone. Cruz's importance to Erewhon was not without reason. But for the Wind Elves, it was also the same. Otherwise, they would not have supported Erewhon's founding hundreds of years ago, and secretly supported Oberth VII to build a new fleet, and helped the Erewhon's people train naval personnel. Although the Ptolemy-class battleship was not the main force of the Wind Elves, it was still a first-class battleship from more than a decade ago. Technically speaking, it was a first-class warship. Cruz's people were well aware of this weight. If the princess announced that she was joining the Holy Cathedral of Wind, it was likely to lead to a holy war between the Holy Cathedral of Fire and the Holy Cathedral of Wind in advance. However, Her Highness was probably worried that there would be a misunderstanding between the two, and added, Mr. Brando, please believe me, I'm not going to be stubborn. It's just that the people of the kingdom are descendants of the Flame King, and have believed in the Holy Cathedral of Fire for generations. It's not easy to change such a concept. Your Highness, you don't have to explain. Brando was a little touched. In fact, the other party did not have to explain to him at all. After all, she was the princess. In theory, he was her knight and her subject. Of course, Brando himself might not have this concept. In his opinion, everyone was born equal. But he knew that Her Highness, who grew up in the royal family, would never think so. She was willing to tell him her thoughts so carefully, at least it proved that she valued him enough. People were born to need each other, and Brando enjoyed this feeling of satisfaction. But the Canolia fleet must be wiped out. We must occupy Ampere Seal so that we can have the confidence to negotiate. Brando still reminded her. In fact, he was a little uncertain. Wiping out the Canolia fleet was a small matter. Him killing Williams in front of everyone was the real big deal. After all, the fleet belonged to the Empire, and the deputy head of the Holy Cathedral Knight Regiment was from the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Simply put, the Empire could lose face, but the Holy Cathedral of Fire must maintain its dignity. The other party was likely to ask Her Highness to hand him over. He could not help but look at the princess who was only 16 years old and was about to turn 17. Princess Griffin nodded firmly, I understand. I will immediately order Count Janelesu to continue the pursuit, wipe out the Canolia fleet, and capture the port of Ampere Seal in one go. Mr. Brando, I will fight for the best interests, whether it's for Erewhon or his people. I will seriously consider your suggestion. I will never let the tragedy of Lord Darius repeat itself. Brando knew that this was a promise, and he bowed to the princess seriously. Her Royal Highness turned to leave, but Orthlis's voice rang out in his mind. This princess is really good. I'm sure you're so touched that you're in a complete mess. Not really, just a little bit of warmth. Brando replied. That's why I said you're really a little fool. The strength you displayed in the previous battle is enough to prove that you're the only person she can rely on, and also the biggest help. You know in your heart that it's not your strength, but she doesn't think so. Her attention to you is just a means for the royal family to win people's hearts. Orthlis said to him seriously. Brando chuckled, but he was touched. He knew that Orthlis was reminding him, afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. Thank you, Lady Orthlis. It's good that you know, Orthlis said. I've seen a lot of palace fights. I admit that the little girl is still kind, but who knows if she will change in the future. You have to be careful. Of course. Brando felt that Orthlis was more and more like his sister. Only a family member would guide him so patiently. Explosions flashed in the sky from time to time. Those were the cannons of Erwin's first royal fleet. The battle had come to an end. Brando was gradually dismantling the cycle of the paradise of adversity. Although the cycle was powerful, it was very tiring to maintain it. It had only been a short while, but he already felt exhausted. The powerful planeswalkers in history, whether it was Tumen, Kelsey, or the Darkness Dragon Odin, other than their planeswalkers' abilities, their strength was also at the top of their generation. Maintaining this level of energy consumption was as easy as breathing for them, but it was a bit too much for him. After all, he was only at the peak of Gold Elemental Awakening. However, he was still careful and did not let the vampire Mephistopheles remove her strength. She was now at the peak of the stability stage of the law. Now that Williams was dead, she was basically the strongest combat force on the battlefield. The Nightmare Furnace did not disband, leaving more than 70 metal beetles behind. Brando left an anxiety card in his hand to replicate the real Lightning Storm, which was one of his killer moves. With these two killer moves, Brando was relieved to put away the Grimoire of Life and the Desperate Trojan Horse, and then dismissed the Death Sentinels. After all, summoning undead creatures was a negative reputation in human society. Brando did not want to have prefixes such as undead or darkness attached to his title in the future. It would have a bad impact on his reputation. To be honest, if this battle was not so urgent, he did not plan to use this card. He looked up at the explosion outside the curtain of rain and quickly thought of something else. He quickly called for Falerne, and then whispered something to the wild elf lady. Falerne's face immediately showed dissatisfaction. This time, she firmly refused. I refuse. This is too much, my lord. Why? Isn't it just opening the corpse? Brando did not understand. He did not understand why Falerne had such a big reaction every time. Anyway, I refuse. Falerne glared at him fiercely, then turned and left. She hoped that the Lord would see her as an elementalist, not a coroner. Brando stood there awkwardly. It was not easy to find a lucky girl in the group, but she did not like opening corpses. This made him very helpless. He sighed and turned around to find another way to persuade the young lady, but suddenly his eyes widened. Don't! He almost screamed, but it was too late. Maynard had already moved the corpses of the Temple Knight to the side, and then the pair of terrifying black hands pulled William's corpse up. At that moment, Brando's heart was filled with 10,000 alpacas. What's wrong? The female knight heard his sudden scream and was slightly startled. She turned around and looked at him. What spoils of war did the knight have? Oh, I checked. The magic was greatly depleted. There were only a few flame-patterned longswords left, Maynard replied without a change in expression, but these longswords are not bad. Our kingdom does not have the craftsmanship to forge them. Brando's vision darkened. In fact, the moment she touched the corpse, he had a bad premonition. She looked too much like his senior sister, and it gave him an instinctive sense of danger. He felt that the two of them might be involved in the same scheme as him. But he still held on to a sliver of hope, but Maynard's answer immediately shattered his last hope. She could only open a standard long sword from the corpse of a temple knight. This could no longer be described as unlucky. At that moment, Brando felt that even his senior sister's face was not as black as hers. What about William? William? I haven't seen him yet. Maynard did not know that the man in front of her was probably thinking of pushing her down, so she answered seriously, "Let me see." "Don't." Brando felt like he had been hit in the face with a hammer, but before he could shout, he saw Maynard remove a ring from William's hand. Brando was immediately stunned. It was a silver ring with a very special pattern on it. This ring does not seem to have been depleted. The female knight examined it and replied seriously. "Brando." Orthless suddenly called out. Brando immediately nodded, "I understand." At that moment, the two of them had seen the pattern on the ring. The pattern was divided into 9 branches, and each of them was very familiar to him. It was the Wind Empress rune of Saint Tassol. The second Wind Empress ring. At that moment, Brando finally understood why William recognized his swordsmanship. "Let me see." He immediately walked over to Maynard and said. The female knight who looked like senior sister looked at him and nodded. Then, she placed the ring on his palm without hesitation. "How do I use it?" Brando asked. "Inject your power of law into it." Orthless also seemed a little excited. After all, there was a heroic soul in each ring, and they were all her companions in the early years. Brando did as he was told. Suddenly, a white light flashed between him and Maynard. Then, in the next moment, a translucent, ghost-like elven girl appeared between them. The girl was very short, and looked like she was only a little taller than Princess Griffin. Her skin was very white, and had the crystalline color of the wind elves. Her ears were pointed, and her long purple-blue hair was tied into a ponytail. She wore a set of tight leather armor, but the most conspicuous thing was that she carried an elven longbow that was almost as tall as her. She seemed to have just woken up and yawned sleepily as soon as she appeared. "Who are you?" Maynard was slightly startled, and one of her hands immediately pressed on the hilt of her sword. However, she guessed that this elven girl's origin was related to the ring on Brando's hand, so she did not pull out her sword. But at that moment, Brando heard Orthless whisper in his mind. Then the female knight appeared on the other side of him. Ah! This time, it was the elven girl who appeared with the longbow on her back who widened her eyes. She did not seem to see Maynard and stared at Orthless in disbelief. "Miss," Orthless stared at her fiercely. The elven girl was immediately startled and shouted, "Miss! Miss! Miss!" Brando was stunned. Could it be that the subordinates of the Wind Empress had a master-servant relationship? He had never heard of it before. He did not see Orthless's expression and only looked at the two strangely. Orthless smiled at the elven girl with satisfaction. Brando looked at the elven girl in confusion. "Hello, I'm Brando. May I know your name, beautiful lady?" The elven girl looked at Brando and Orthless and guessed their relationship. Therefore, without even thinking, he replied loudly and righteously, "That's right. Hello, Mr. Brando, I'm the Sharp-Blade Knight Orthless, the chief archer of the Wind Empress. Please give me your advice." "Ouch, it hurts." With a loud bang, she immediately hugged her little head. P.S. 5K chapter, the word "die in battle" is added at the front. Facepalm, I slept too late and was too muddle-headed. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:15. The elven girl hugged her head and squatted down in pain, and Brendel reacted immediately. He immediately looked back at Worthless and asked, "If she is worthless, then who are you?" "She likes to play pranks." "I am worthless," the elven girl replied rudely. The elven girl's tears flowed out. She felt so wrong that she wanted to cry. When did she like to play pranks? And why did she lose her name? But she didn't dare to say a word. She could only hold her head and cry silently. Then who is she? She is… Sonia. Brando already had an answer in his heart. He had long suspected that the elven girl would often address the Flame King, Great Sage Fanzan, and even Eloranta as equals. As a Knight of the Wind Empress, this was very unusual. Secondly, would the Sharp Blade Knight Worthless master the inheritance of the 9 Luminary Sword Empress? It was just that Brando found it hard to believe that the legendary character was the one who spent time with him, taught and assisted him wholeheartedly, and occasionally threw a tantrum. Worthless gave him the feeling that she was the sister next door, not the legendary cold hero. This answer really took him by surprise. He didn't show it on his face and pretended to be suspicious. "Sonia. Isn't that the Wind Whisperer?" "If I remember correctly, Lady Sonia seems to have a rare long black hair, and she shouldn't be so young." Worthless stared at him fiercely with a pair of purple-blue eyes. Brando pretended not to see it. "Also, Worthless, didn't you sacrifice yourself in the Grey Swamp?" "I didn't think of it just now." "How did you know about the final battle with the Dark Dragon?" "That's because I told her," she replied fiercely. "You told her?" "You." The elven girl finally realized that she had let it slip again, but she still couldn't change this habit of hers even after thousands of years. "I don't want to see you today, Brando. Get the hell out of here, as far as you can." After the Elf Queen said this, she immediately disappeared in front of him. "Looks like she's really angry." Brendel sighed. The answer was just as he thought. Worthless was Sonorso. She was the sage of the Wind Elves, one of the 4 saints of the Holy War, the Wind Empress. Maynard looked at all of this until the elf lady disappeared after scolding Brando fiercely. She was stunned for a moment before she calmly asked, "Did I do something wrong?" As most of the communication between Brando and the Wind Empress after Saint Tossol was done through consciousness, she did not know what had happened. Brando shrugged. "It has nothing to do with you, Madame Maynard. It was just that someone was angry out of humiliation." The real Worthless in history sat obediently, looking at Brando with tears in her eyes. Brando helplessly comforted her. Speaking of which, the heroic soul of the Holy War was actually made to cry by the Wind Empress. This elven girl's character was really bad. Then he turned around and explained to Maynard about the soul-sealing ring. Of course, he did not mention the part about the Wind Empress. After all, Maynard had already seen the previous scene. If he continued to hide it, it would be suspicious. He might as well tell her 70% truth and 30% lies. The key was that the identity of the Wind Empress was too sensitive, and Brando did not want to be hunted down by the Wind Elves. "So, this is the inheritance of the Wind Elves." Maynard seemed very calm after listening, and did not pursue the issue of identity. "But why did it end up in the human world?" "To be exact, it is the inheritance of the Mist Elves," Brando replied. "After the Silver Fire was extinguished, the Wind Elves of today are no longer the race of the War of the Holy Saints. The fall of the Holy Seal is not without reason." Maynard's eyelashes fluttered slightly. "You said that a person can't wear 2 rings of the Wind Empress, right?" she asked again. "The key is that it is meaningless to wear it. After all, an inheritance contains endless knowledge, and for most people, they may not be able to fully understand it in their entire life. Things like the ring of the Holy Seal are not the more the better. If you are greedy, you will only end up with superficial knowledge." Brando replied using the original words of the Wind Empress. "So you don't want it?" Maynard asked. can you give this ring to me? Brando froze for a moment. In fact, he wanted to leave it for Freya. But on second thought, although Orthlis's title was the Sharp Blade Knight, her teacher, Suoya, was a famous sharpshooter of the Mist Elves. Moreover, it seemed that she also used a bow. It was not necessarily suitable for the future Valkyrie. But Maynard did not seem to be an archer. You want it? No, Maynard shook her head and did not hide it. It is not me, but Her Royal Highness. Her Royal Highness. Did Princess Griffin know how to use a bow? It did not seem necessary. But Brando reacted. Maynard was indeed thinking for Her Royal Highness, because Princess Griffin would definitely give this ring to her brother, hoping that the inheritance of the Wind Elves could change the cowardly character of the little prince. But could an inheritance really change a person's character? Not necessarily. Brando was a little disapproving of this. He replied. It can be, but the Ring of the Soul is very special. The inheritance also needs to be approved by the heroic soul. Maynard immediately looked at the tearful Orthlis. The elf girl was still sobbing. Noticing the gaze of the two, she sniffled and stopped. Then with red eyes, she shook her head seriously at Maynard. No, I have already chosen a candidate. You have already chosen a candidate? Brando was stunned. From the time she was summoned until now, she had only seen him and Maynard. Could it be that she had chosen William? But it did not seem like it, and she had never seen William use a bow. I chose you, Sister Maynard. Unexpectedly, the elf girl's words were shocking. She pointed at Maynard and said. Brando felt a little awkward. It was not because Orthlis had chosen Maynard as her successor, but because she actually called Maynard sister. It should be known that she was a heroic soul that was thousands of years old. But then again, when Orthlis sacrificed herself, her mental age was only 16 years old. From this point of view, it was not wrong for her to call Maynard Sister Maynard. Me? Maynard was slightly stunned. But I don't use a bow. I don't use a bow either. Orthlis said with her eyes wide open. She seemed to have just noticed the longbow on her back. Oh, sister, you are talking about this. I thought that teacher's bow looked good, so I followed him. Actually, I am a magician. You. Brando was speechless. Her title was the Blade Knight, and her teacher was a holy archer. She carried a longbow and wore leather armor, and then she claimed that she was a magician. A wind elf. No, a mist elf. But I am also not a wizard. Maynard was also a little helpless. Wizard? Is that what you call a magician in this era? But it doesn't matter. Orthlis suddenly became serious. Sister Maynard, I feel that you have a very outstanding magical talent. Besides, you are still young. I believe that one day you will become a great magician. Maynard was silent. Brando looked at her curiously. He did not know why Orthlis said that the female knight had outstanding talent as a mage, but his heart skipped a beat. Perhaps it was too much of a coincidence, but Hashit was indeed a very outstanding magician. But she shook her head. I don't want to be a magician. Orthlis was stunned. Why? Magicians are very powerful, and their magic is very beautiful. Brando frowned slightly. He did not know why, but he saw a flash of struggle between the female knight's eyebrows. Let me think about it. Maynard replied. Very well. The elven girl was clearly brimming with confidence. It was obvious that she was extremely confident in her magic. Her pitiful look from before had disappeared to who knows where. She put one hand on her chest and said, By the way, I am an expert in string magic. Ancient string magic. Dragon magic. Brendel shuddered in fear. Maynard could not help but raise her head slightly. String magic was divided into two stages after the Great Library of Babel Tower was burned down. After that, the magic exclusive to the dragons extended to a lower branch, which was the so-called modern string magic. And today, as long as there was no specific article, string magic often referred to modern string magic. But ancient string magic always had only one meaning, and that was dragon magic. Brando did not expect that among the 24 Knight of the Mist Elves, there would be someone who was proficient in dragon magic. Sure enough, the heroes of the ancient times were legendary monsters. Even the wizards of Galaga did not learn dragon magic. No wonder she was so confident. She did have the capital to back it up. Brando thought that if it were him, he might have agreed. After all, it was dragon magic. Dragon magic was a completely different system from modern magic. In fact, in modern magic, most of the spells that requested the authority of the Dragon of War, Tiamat, were born from dragon magic. For example, the Shire's dragon strike that blew up half of the Anderla Cathedral. Dragon magic was a step further. Dragon magic itself was a spell that obtained the authority of Tiamat, and it was known as the most destructive spell. In comparison, the elementalist's magic was as docile as a kitten. But what he did not expect was that Maynard was still unmoved. She thought for a moment and calmly said, "Let's continue to check the loot." At that moment, Brando only wanted to say in his heart, "No, sister, you should go and learn magic. Leave the glorious and arduous task of opening the body to me." But Maynard naturally did not hear the words in his heart. The female knight removed a bracelet from William's body. To be exact, it looked like a wrist guard. The whole thing was made of flowing silver, and the shape was part of a claw that extended forward. Ah! This bracelet. Maynard was slightly stunned. It was probably because she had never seen flowing metal that could be stabilized into a specific shape. Damn! At that moment, Brendel's heart was filled with shock. If he did not see it wrongly, if he was not mistaken, this bracelet was one of the top equipment dropped by the Wind Elf players of the Holy Cathedral of Wind when they killed Williams in the future, Firefly. Or rather, it was called the Torch of Knowledge, one of the holy items of the Sky Dragon Crystal. This. Brando did not know for a moment whether this senior's hand was considered black or red. P.S. Today I'm taking a small break. 3,000 words take a break. I think I will maintain an average speed for a while to rest and prepare for the next explosion. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:16. The reason why Maynard was unlucky was naturally because of her previous battle results. Although there was a phenomenon of magic dissipation in the world of Wond, magic items were closely related to the power of their owners. When the previous owner died, most magic items would lose their magic and even disintegrate into pieces. However, this dissipation was not random. Some specially treated equipment, such as the Ring of the Wind Empress, would not have magic dissipation, and for ordinary equipment, losing about 2/3 of its magic was more normal. For example, the existence of elemental activation, Wond was definitely a first-class figure in this era. In other words, the magic equipment on them would not be ordinary goods, but under Maynard's inspection, only a standard longsword was left. Luck was sometimes illusory, but sometimes it was hard to deny its existence. At least, before Maynard removed the bracelet from William's body, Brando was sure of it. "Can I see it?" He was stunned for a moment and said to Miss Knight. Maynard did not think and directly handed the bracelet to him. Brando did not need to look to know what the attributes of this thing were, but even so, out of a player's instinct, he could not wait to open the window, a light green, translucent light screen that only he could see, with a few lines of elvish text on it. Because this equipment had a lot to do with the wild elves, Firefly, bracelet, silver rank, ancient magic item, equipment requirement, 225 ounces, Strength plus 27, Constitution plus 22, Wisdom plus 6 special effect. Increase experience gain by 5% special effect. Dark Perception plus 3. Sure enough, it was exactly the same. Brendel held the bracelet in his hand and felt completely at ease. Although it was only an ancient equipment, the name of the Firefly was definitely famous in the game. First of all, its owner, William, was not an ordinary person, and secondly, the attributes of the bracelet itself were extremely powerful. Strength plus 27, Constitution plus 22, Wisdom plus 6. It should be known that the main attributes of a Gold Peak warrior were only around 500 ounces. Now, although he had reached the realm of elemental activation, his attributes were still in the upper reaches of gold, and his main attributes did not exceed 300. To put it simply, an ordinary equipment position that could increase the attributes of more than 10% was a very substantial bonus. But the strength of the Firefly was far more than that. In addition to the attributes, the increase in experience and dark perception were the most important components of this ancient bracelet. Needless to say, the increase in experience was a very rare attribute, and dark perception was a crucial attribute in the game. The most important function of dark perception was to let people feel the flow of dark magic, and in the world of Woned, due to the erosion of the 12 magic moons reflected in the sky, the Sea of Magic, the entire continent, including the Blessed Land, was constantly infiltrated by dark magic. Having dark perception could foresee the threat. The easiest way to use it was to sense the movement of monsters. This attribute, in the future, of the dark, of sorcerers, of sorcerers. Because of sorcerers the dark, of Woned of Sorn, of sorcerial dark, and the of sorcerers, of dark. If he wanted to quickly increase his strength in that era and be one step ahead of others, he had to have a high enough darkness perception attribute. This was a consensus in the game later on. But in fact, in the game, except for some special existences, such as witches or blind prophets, most of the ordinary people had zero dark perception. Therefore, equipment with dark perception bonus was crucial. Even if he did not get this bracelet today, Brando would collect similar equipment for the future. Erwin wanted to survive in the future, and its enemies were not only the nobles of the north. But he did not expect Maynard to give him a surprise. You know this bracelet? Maynard looked at him and asked sharply. I've heard some rumors about it, Brando replied. In his memory, it was said that this bracelet was made by the Sky and Knowledge Dragon Crystal for the Council of the Surveillance Eye. But in the game, the Council of the Surveillance Eye had long disappeared with the destruction of the final fortress, Babel, so no one knew the real reason why the Dragon Crystal made such a bracelet for the Council of the Surveillance Eye. I'm very interested in this bracelet, Brando said. It was originally your loot, Mr. Brando, Maynard replied. Thank you. Brando immediately put on the bracelet, and the Firefly melted into the Crimson Blessing and Bahamut's gauntlet like mercury, as if it had become a part of the gauntlet. But most magic items had the ability to change their appearance, so Maynard did not find it strange. He put on the Firefly and immediately felt a new power merge into his body. Then, a very strange yet familiar feeling spread out from his body in all directions. The curtain of rain seemed to darken slightly, and then it became clear in an instant. At that moment, he suddenly felt the flow of magic between heaven and earth. Although it was obscure, it was everywhere. The storm in the outer sea also contained traces of magic. This magic was actually the purest power, or to put it another way in the game, EXP. It was just that no one had a way to collect it. Brando glanced at the female knight Maynard beside him. There were also traces of magic flowing in her body, but it was not obvious. It mainly gathered in the muscles of her limbs and shoulders where explosive power was bred. This was the power of the upper silver level. It was already considerable power among mortals, but it was still too rare. Miss Maynard, can I ask for your advice? The female knight raised her head and immediately understood that he wanted to experiment with the new magic equipment. She nodded, took a step back, and drew her long sword. "Excuse me." She thrust her sword forward. In Brando's vision, Maynard's swordsmanship was divided into three, extending 3 red lines. This was the effect of the in-depth analysis skill that the Silver Elves taught him. However, he didn't need this hint at all, because he was too familiar with Maynard's swordsmanship, Erwin's improved battle formation swordsmanship. Brando instinctively thought that she had learned it from Freya. After all, this improved swordsmanship from Sword Saint Darius would definitely shine in the eyes of those who were interested. When he taught it to Freya, he didn't intend to keep it a secret. Without even thinking, Brando clenched the Bahamut's grip in his left hand and grabbed the path of Maynard's swordsmanship in advance. At that moment, it was as if the female knight had delivered the sword to his hand for him to grasp. Maynard was slightly startled and lost her mind for a moment. "Use your skills, Miss Knight," Brando immediately reminded her. He wasn't here to practice swordsmanship with Maynard. Maynard immediately gritted her teeth. The blade trembled, and a white light shot out from the sword. At that moment, Brando immediately sensed the magic gathering in Maynard's body. He immediately leaned to the side and avoided the sword wind. This was the power of dark perception, exactly the same as in the game. Unlike the Silver Elves' in-depth analysis, dark perception couldn't determine the direction of the enemy's attack, but it could sense the magic gathering before all special skills were cast. The two complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses, making it the best warning system in a battle. Brando finished his experiment, but Maynard's eyes narrowed and another sword came at his shoulder. Good heavens, Brando knew that the female knight was serious this time. Obviously, she felt humiliated when he caught her sword. As the best student of the Boston Royal Knight Academy, she naturally wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Their personalities were very similar, but Brando wasn't afraid of the current Maynard. Not to mention strength, he could easily crush her in swordsmanship. He didn't even draw his sword. He blocked with his left hand, and then grabbed Maynard's sword hand with his right hand. In his imagination, this grab would naturally make the opponent lose the ability to attack further. But he didn't expect Maynard to be so decisive. Her right hand was controlled, so she immediately threw her sword away. At the same time, her left hand grabbed the falling sword, and with a cold face, she stabbed it at Brando's abdomen. Left-handed sword. Brando hurriedly let go of the female knight's right hand, but instead of retreating, he moved forward and pressed down on Maynard's left hand that was holding the sword. But it was at this moment that the Bahamut's grip on his left hand determined that this was an attack or defense action, so an unexpected scene happened. Crimson Blessing, the special effect of the Bahamut's grip, the fire shield was activated. A ball of flame exploded between the two. Brando was fine, but the armor in front of his chest was slightly blackened. But Maynard, who was wearing the Erwin military uniform, was miserable. The front of her upper body was directly burned, and her snow-white skin was immediately exposed. Even under the charred holes in her underwear, a towering round curve was faintly discernible. The two of them froze. At least Brando only had this thought in his mind at that moment. "Turn your head," Maynard said coldly. Brando hurriedly rubbed his nose and turned his head, feeling a little dry in his mouth. "Let go of my hand." "Give me your cloak," Maynard said calmly. She didn't turn around because there were many other people there. Although the noble private soldiers under Count Audine and the officers of the Royal Knight Academy hadn't noticed the unforeseen event here for a while, Brando did as he was told. He took off his cloak and handed it to her with his eyes closed. Maynard calmly wrapped herself in the cloak, then looked at Brando and asked, "Mr. Brando, are you really the son of Lord Darius?" Brando didn't know why this lady knight suddenly asked this. But it couldn't be better if she didn't pursue the matter. "I'm not too sure, but I don't think the Shire would lie to me." "Your swordsmanship was taught to you by your grandfather?" "No, of course not. I learned it from other players." But of course, Brando wouldn't answer like that. Otherwise, it would really be hard to explain. He thought for a moment and nodded. Maynard glanced at him and nodded. Then, she picked up her sword from the ground and turned to leave. Leaving Brando standing alone in the rain, he was completely relieved. "Mr. Brando, you're so lecherous," Orthlis looked at him curiously. "By the way, did you do the same thing to the Wind Empress? Otherwise, why would she be so angry with you?" Brando just remembered that there was a peeping girl beside him. But this question was a little tricky. If he dared to do such a thing to the Elven Queen, he would have died without a burial place. So, he glared at her fiercely. "Child, go away. I'm more than 1,000 years old." The elven girl suddenly became proud. "Compared to me, Mr. Brando is the child." "Damn, now you're thinking of this." Brando suddenly felt that this girl was a little bit unbeatable. He couldn't be bothered with her and went to check William's body. He thought that no matter how unlucky he was, he couldn't be more unlucky than Maynard. In the end, he really did find 2 pieces of equipment that didn't have mana dissipation. One of them was a cloak, the Cloak of Flame, plus 15 bloodline, plus 3 defense. He was willing to bet that Williams didn't even know that this cloak had bloodline bonuses. He must have taken a fancy to this cloak's defensive ability. In fact, this was a very common phenomenon in the world of Wound. Because NPCs couldn't see the attributes of the equipment, they would often make judgments based on the surface ability of the magical equipment. Only a few great scholars like Tolman could carefully analyze all the effects of a piece of equipment. This process was called appraisal in the game. But for normal equipment, players didn't need to appraise, except for a few special equipment. This was probably a benefit for the players. The other piece of equipment was also a wizard's item. It was a gold-ranked staff with plus 32 constitution, which could summon 2 gargoyles and increase one's magic power. This staff was limited to gold-ranked wizards. Unfortunately, only the Shire under Brando's command could equip it. But the Shire was a card creature, so it couldn't equip items in the real world. Brando didn't know that Williams would carry this item with him. He could only guess that it was a spoil of war. It was not a surprise to him that he found 2 items that were used by wizards. In the game, he couldn't find what he wanted for many years, so he was called the friend of the wizards. His senior sister often joked to outsiders about this. Sophie is her best friend. But this kind of praise was unnecessary. Brando couldn't bear to look back on his miserable past. After sorting out the spoils of war, there were a total of 11 blazing long swords, the Ring of the Wind Empress, Orthlis's version, Firefly, the Flaming Cloak, and a gold-ranked staff. There was also something that Brando didn't expect. He immediately recognized that it was a fragment of the flaming blade Odorfice. It should be the middle part of the broken blade. The fragment was as bright as a mirror, but there was a dark red flame pattern on it. When Brando found this fragment from William's corpse, the soul of the flaming blade that was bound to him immediately vibrated. Brando didn't feel excited at all when he got this fragment. He only felt that it was a big problem. Cruz's people couldn't leave the flaming blade in Erewhon. If this matter wasn't handled well, it would be a situation where one of them would die. Just as he frowned, he saw Freya running towards him from the rain. "Brando! What's wrong?" Brando put away the fragment of the flaming blade and raised his head to ask. He saw Freya's nervous look and couldn't help but feel a little strange. At this time, the royal fleet of Erewhon shouldn't have killed Cruz's people so quickly. Could it be that they had encountered a new enemy? Impossible. Brando didn't think that Cruz's people would dare to continue to increase their troops, just like he didn't think that the Northern Coalition army could regroup in a short time. Someone came. Freya ran to his side and answered while gasping for breath. He did not know how far she came from. "Someone." "Yes." The girl from Butchie nodded quickly. Who? It's Archbishop Wood. He said he wants to see you. What? Brando was slightly stunned. He just thought of trouble, but he didn't expect it to come to him so quickly. But why did Wood come to him at this time? Was it for the flaming blade? He should know that there was no room for compromise. P.S. 4,500 words, preparing to make a new character card. Comrades, I need your help. You know what I mean. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:17. Through the misty forest, Brando, accompanied by Freya, saw Wood. This was the second time he had seen the Archbishop of the Holy Cathedral of Fire since he was in Ampere Seal. Seeing Mephisto standing next to Wood, Brando hurriedly saluted, "Teacher." Although Saint Hossel taught him the 9 luminaries sword art, Mephisto also taught him a lot of practical skills. Nominally, they also had the status of teacher and student, and the Elf Queen did not object to this. Wood glanced at Mephisto with slight surprise. "So that's how it is, you have a good student." Indeed. Brando looked up and saw several red-robed knights of the Holy Cathedral behind the two of them. He couldn't help but squint his eyes into a line, trying to figure out Wood's intentions. However, Wood had made him suffer a big loss in the name of Tumen, and Brando would never forget this lesson. Seeing Brando's expression, the Archbishop of the Holy Cathedral of Fire smiled awkwardly. "It seems that Mr. Brando has a deep prejudice against me." He suppressed the surprise in his heart. Knight Williams brought 10 knights of the Holy Cathedral. Even if the Canolia fleet was blocked by Erwin's royal fleet, it would not be wiped out immediately, not to mention the White-Winged Knight Regiment. But what he saw was the dejected crew's people who were restrained, and the flag of the White-Winged Knight Regiment was thrown into the muddy water. He didn't know if the Holy Cathedral had been too greedy for comfort for a long time, or if its enemies were too strong. Wood looked at the young man in front of him, and a strong sense of uneasiness surged in his heart. "Lord Archbishop, you know the proverb of the elves, everyone gets what they do." Brando replied. "Ha," Wood smiled bitterly, "so I'm here to taste the bitter fruit I planted back then." But Mr. Brando knows that this is not prejudice. The Holy Cathedral always needs a stable heroine. "So you chose the nobles of the north?" Brendel's eyebrows were raised in an aggressive manner. Wood was right. From the standpoint of the crew's people, there was no need for him to put himself in the enemy's shoes. He was not so kind. Whether it is the crew's people or the Erwin people, they are all descendants of the Flame King. They have to uphold the honor. The Cipher royal family had long lost their throne. After the Casey siblings lost the Lionheart sword, this matter became known to the world. At that time, the nobles vowed to abdicate Hesse I's throne, and promised that his heirs would no longer covet the throne. Therefore, Erwin today has no second heir other than Prince Haruz. I admit that the Holy Sanctum did not consider this matter properly. Moros was too stubborn, and I could not stop him. Wood sighed. Brando watched helplessly as Wood put the blame on the dead Moros. Wood was different from Williams. He was a typical pragmatist, but the other side said so, which was already a concession. This made him feel a little vigilant because the Holy Cathedral of Fire's compromise was almost unnecessary. He stared at Wood warily. The chief priest of the Holy Cathedral of Fire smiled bitterly again. "You don't have to doubt. I am here on behalf of the Holy Cathedral of Fire to ask Her Royal Highness Princess Griffin for peace." Ah! Freya, who was behind Brando, could not help but let out a soft cry. This time it was really Brando's turn to be surprised. Was it just for the Canolia fleet? But wasn't the face of the Empire more important than a local fleet? If the crew's people really thought so, they would be a terrible opponent. But Brando thought of another possibility. Williams is dead. He died in your hands. Wood was stunned. Yes. Brando nodded. This was a secret that could not be hidden. Besides, Mephisto was on the side, and he was not worried that the crew's people would turn hostile. The chief priest of the Holy Cathedral of Fire was silent. This is indeed a problem, he muttered to himself. But Williams is grumpy and arrogant. His stubbornness led to his death in a foreign land, which is not unreasonable. What? Brando almost thought he had heard wrong. Brando, I'm afraid that the crew's people don't have the time to go around biting people, just like the dog that fell into the mud to fight for the bone. They can't even protect themselves. But we also have a problem, but you can now make conditions to them. Mephisto finally spoke, and as soon as he spoke, the knight behind Wood glared at him. Can't protect themselves? Mr. Brando, I hope the princess will give up the pursuit of the Canolia fleet. Wood said. That's impossible, Brando refused firmly, but he paused and asked, what are the conditions? Wood smiled. Sure enough, as he expected, the real mastermind behind the princess' side was this young man. But what made him feel uneasy was that the other party was the same kind of person as him. The Holy Cathedral was going to bleed a lot this time. We can make the nobles in the north give up Ampere Seal. You mean we still have to coexist peacefully with these people who are trying to usurp the throne? After annihilating the Canolia fleet, we can still take advantage of the situation and go north. Wood was already very clear about the way people like Brando acted. They must have considered the results before giving such an order, so he would not use the revenge of the Holy Cathedral of Fire as a false threat. It would be meaningless. He thought for a moment and said, as you said, the royal family of Covardo should continue to hold the throne, but there are still many nobles in the north, and it will take time to calm their suspicions. It is better for Erwin to unite peacefully than to confront each other. Brando looked at the Archbishop of the Holy Cathedral of Fire in surprise. He understood the meaning behind his words. Wood meant to acknowledge the legitimacy of the royal family of Covardo, so that the North would have no actual basis to rely on, and the internal strife in the kingdom would disappear. But this was a little too easy. How could the Holy Cathedral compromise so thoroughly? It was not that the remaining forces in the north did not have the strength to fight against the princess. Even if they failed, Cruz's people could be very stubborn. Or was this another trap? He could not help but deeply suspect. Mr. Brando, you don't have to suspect that this is another deception. I will tell you the reason, and you will understand as soon as you hear it. The reason is actually Moros. Moros? You should know that he killed Princess Magadol. No, wait, Brando suddenly reacted, and he thought of a very terrible possibility. Wasn't Princess Magadol killed because she discovered your secret? Wood's face was a little ugly. How could the Holy Cathedral do such a thing, not to mention that she did not know the Holy Cathedral's plan from beginning to end? The request for reinforcements from the Empire and the transfer of Williams from the headquarters was just a spur-of-the-moment idea after I read Moros's letter. No one else knew about it except Moros himself. In other words, Her Royal Highness discovered another secret. I'm afraid so. Wood's face was dignified. Mr. Brando, I'm afraid that Moros is a spy from All for One. Ah! Brando could not help but cry out. So you opened the door of flame of the Holy Cathedral of Fire in the port of Ampere Seal. He saw Wood looking at him seriously, and understood that there was no need to say more. At that moment, Brando felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured on his head. The situation was serious. He finally understood why Wood came to him to make peace. It turned out that the whole thing was a huge conspiracy. If Moros was a spy from All for One, then he knew early on that the Holy Cathedral of Fire would set up the door of flame in Ampere Seal. He might even have been the one who guided it, because All for One's goal was those door of flame. The door of flame was a huge teleportation circle, and the core of the teleportation circle designated the destination of the teleportation. But the teleportation circle itself had no intelligence, and it could be used to connect to other places with slight modifications. For example, the Devil's Lair, the Sulphur River. Brando suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Brando, the Roman said that she found a trap, and she wanted to help you. That was the first thing Amandina said to him when they met. He thought she was talking about the Holy Cathedral's trap and was angry at her childishness. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that Amandina might have known what she was going to face. She knew about the conspiracy that he did not know about.
For the first time, Brando felt extremely uneasy, and even had the thought that he might lose the lovely person who always stood by his side fearlessly. Once this thought appeared, it could not be suppressed, and made him feel even colder as he stood in the rain. Since Butchie, Brando knew that at least one person in this world would be with him forever. He could pinch her face without restraint and call her an idiot, and she would frown at him and throw a tantrum. But he would never forget the promise, the words she said to him that night. "Why don't you go over?" Amandina seemed to still be sitting on the rock, holding her bag with both hands on her leather skirt, and a pair of round-toed leather shoes swinging back and forth in the air. "They don't like me." "Why?" "Auntie and I are weirdos in their eyes, and no ordinary girl wants to be a merchant. So it's normal that they don't like them. I've never seen them. Auntie has been by my side for as long as I can remember. Auntie said, 'Little Roman, when you grow up, you have to repay Auntie.' So that's why you want to be a merchant?" "Yes." "What a strange idea." "It doesn't matter." From that moment on, he knew that he had fallen deeply in love with that strange girl. That was because they had some similar characteristics. He was also a strange person in the eyes of others, but the two of them had the same goal. She wanted to be a great merchant, and he wanted to save Erewhon in his heart. These were strange goals that ordinary people could not imagine, but it didn't matter. As long as they agreed, it would be fine. Brando, Roman, she. Freya also reacted. This simple-minded girl from the countryside of Butchie had worried about her best friend even earlier than Brando. But Brendel gave her a reassuring look, although his heart was also cold. "Archbishop Wood, do you think that All for One can control those doors of flame?" he asked, still holding on to the last bit of hope. "Mr. Brando, there's no need to guess. We lost them before we came here. All for One connects them to the underground of Georgandy Ridge, and you should know where that is. The Sulphur River." Brando replied through gritted teeth. "So what am I supposed to do? Give the order to stop pursuing Canolia's fleet, and then turn around to fight the demons of Georgandy Ridge, here, on Aween's soil?" He could not help but curse, "Look at what you've done, Kurlut's bastards. What bullshit Holy Cathedral of Fire." This was the first time Freya saw Brando so angry, and her face was pale with fright. The last time was in Fortress Reden, but she was not there. "Well said," Mephistopheles replied. "Now that's more like a man." Wood was speechless. It was an indisputable fact that the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and even the 4 holy cathedrals, had been infiltrated by the cultists. It was just that the situation had never been as out of their expectations as today. This time, the Holy Cathedral of Fire had really lost a lot of face.
Even more than when Cruz's fleet was defeated by Brando. "We will fight side by side with you." That was all he could say. Brando snorted softly. He did not trust these Cruz people at all. If he had known that Moros was All for One spy, then he might have guessed the other party's plan the moment he saw those portals. It was a pity that Moros missed this opportunity in history. There was no war in Ampere Seal, and Cruz's people did not build the Door of Flame in Erewhon until after his term. Later, Moros returned to Cruz, and Brando also went north to St. Osol and Fanzan. Later, some news about the Holy Cathedral of Fire gradually faded from his memory. And he would forever miss the opportunity to identify Moros. "Well," Brando finally said. I will persuade Her Royal Highness to give up chasing the Canolian fleet, but you must also persuade the Northern Coalition army to join our camp. If things are allowed to develop, you know better than me what will happen near Ampere Seal. He then pointed to Wood and said, I hope Lord Archbishop remembers what you said today, or you will regret your previous words and deeds. Brando's heart was burning with anger, but now he was only worried about the safety of Romaine. If the Roman were to suffer even a little bit of damage in Ampere Seal, he would definitely make the Holy Cathedral of Fire pay the price. This was by no means an empty threat. When he turned around, Wood vaguely heard Brando mutter, I hope the number of demons sent by All for One is not too large. The Archbishop of the Holy Cathedral of Fire seemed to be stunned for a moment before he reacted. This young man seems to know too much. P.S. 4000. Also, thank you for the character form. I will use it as a blueprint to check it myself to make a character card. This will make it much easier for me. Thank you very much. Also, today I will put up the second group's log. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:18. The invasion of the demons quickly became the most serious situation at the moment, and everyone knew the weight of this news. Would hope that the princess could first release the captives of the Holy Cathedral of Fire and let the Canolian fleet recover at least some combat power to deal with the coming war with the demons. But Brando did not immediately respond to this request. Time was tight, but it did not mean that he needed to give up the previous victory. The war took a break, and both sides needed to rest. The demons could not appear in front of them immediately. These creatures from the Sulphur River would also be hindered in the heavy rain. Before that, even in the worst-case scenario, he had more than 10 hours to negotiate with the crew's people. Brando's request was very simple, but it was also a bit of an exorbitant demand. The Northern Coalition army should return all the captives belonging to the princess, including His Royal Highness the Little Prince. After that, the Holy Cathedral of Fire had to bear all the losses caused by this war because Brando believed that the northern nobles started the war under their instigation. He did not care whether the truth was the case or not. This included the compensation and trade compensation agreement. Of course, the compensation was done privately in order to take care of the face of the crew's people. Brando could still meet this small request. After all, he only focused on the practical benefits. The trade compensation agreement was a compensation method proposed by Brando. On the surface, it was a trade preference of the crew's empire for the Erewhon Empire. But in fact, there were many detailed conditions, including 2 important technology transactions. The drawings of the magic transmission device and the manufacturing technology of the Empire's Dreadnought-class battleship. This was simply blackmail. Seeing these 2 conditions, the expression on Wood's face was as dark as the dark clouds outside Ampere Seal. He did not say a word and just left. Then he sent an envoy to negotiate with Brando. The envoy simply claimed that if Brando did not cooperate, the Holy Cathedral would give up on Erewhon, and crew's people would lose a little face at most. But the best outcome for Erewhon was a great loss of vitality, and the worst outcome was undoubtedly the destruction of the country. If these words were placed in front of other Erewhon nobles, it would undoubtedly be a huge bomb. Even the princess would be shaken by these words. However, Brando just smiled and ordered Mephistopheles to throw this guy out of the camp. What a joke. He was well aware of the Holy Sanctum's weakness. Cruz's people probably didn't just want to save face, but more importantly, the secret of the Door of Flame must not fall into the hands of All for One. He knew that there were several permanent doors of flame in the Cruz Empire. Once the secret of the Doors of Flame was leaked out, the Empire would become another gate from the Sulphur River to the surface world. With this secret in hand, Brando naturally wouldn't compromise easily. However, he also felt uneasy in his heart. If that old fox would really dare to bide his time, Brando was afraid that he would have to take the initiative to compromise with him. This was because only he, Amandina, and Freya knew that the Roman were still in the port of Amperseel. And once Cruz's people took the initiative, he was afraid that Erwin would be skinned alive. Brando gritted his teeth and held on for an hour and a half. Finally, Wood couldn't help but come to the door. After all, the Archbishop didn't have any news that was enough to make him feel at ease. When Wood came, Brando breathed a sigh of relief. Cruz's people had given in. In just half an hour, Brando signed a temporary peace agreement with Wood, taking advantage of the momentum of Cruz's people giving in. Brando was not soft-hearted. In addition to the superficial agreement, the two sides signed a temporary secret agreement. The Holy Cathedral of Fire privately recognized the right of the royal family of Covardo to prosecute several major leaders of the northern nobles for usurpation in the future. This included the right to dispose of Duke Cipher, Marquis Balta, Count Vitokin, Marquis Joachim, and others. However, this second clause was not brought to the surface. First of all, now was not the time to shake the confidence of the northern nobles. Second, the Archbishop had already discovered that Duke Cipher, Marquis Balta, Count Vitokin, and Marquis Joachim were nowhere to be found. Presumably, His Royal Highness Prince Horoz had also fallen into the hands of All for One. Therefore, even if the Holy Cathedral wanted to fulfill this clause, they did not have the ability to do so for the time being. After meeting all the requirements, Brando naturally agreed in principle to return all the captives of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, including the 7 knights of the Holy Cathedral, the White-Winged Knight, and the other captives of the Canolia fleet. After all, these people would also play their role in the war and could be regarded as Brando's coolies. Although Cruz's people might not think so. At the same time, in exchange for a second, more important agreement, Brando also took a step back on the original technology transfer agreement and changed the latest type of magical transmission device to a blueprint that was not more than 10 years behind, and the battleship manufacturing technology was also changed to frigate manufacturing technology. But even so, Brando still left a trap. Because his original target, the Knight, was the design of the Cruz Empire's new frigate. The Cruz battleship pursued firepower and armor, which was cumbersome and unpleasant. He preferred the Wind Elves' new type of battleship, but the Cruz's new frigate was a design stolen from their old enemy, the Hazel people, but it was extremely brilliant. After all, the Hazel people were one of the best magicians in the world of Wond. Unfortunately, although Wood was a respected archbishop and the most talented senior of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, he was not a technocrat. Most of the nobles who followed the army of the Holy Cathedral of Fire were unlikely to bring along master craftsmen. So in the case where everyone was unaware of the trap, Brando naturally tricked them cleanly and ruthlessly. In the end, the two sides exchanged captives and reached a preliminary settlement. Brando did not intend to let the two armies that had just killed each other a few hours ago merge together to fight against the demons. This was undoubtedly a fantasy. So he simply let the Northern Coalition army stay in the Buñuel area, while the Princess's army and Anthony's army were directly stationed in the Mar Highlands. This proposal was also approved by everyone. Anyway, the Northern nobles were not necessarily willing to stand in the same trench as Her Royal Highness. Then Brando blocked the news of the demon invasion and did not let any rumors spread among the ordinary soldiers. He only told them that there might be a foreign army from Jorgendy Ridge invading Amperseel. Although it was frustrating to have to go back to the battle before they could celebrate after winning a big battle, it was better than having a large number of deserters immediately. He had seen similar scenes before, during the Second and Third War of the Black Rose. Both Austin and the nobles of the royal faction agreed. They knew the virtue of their men. Although the royal faction had parted ways with Her Royal Highness earlier, the princess had said that she would let bygones be bygones, and the two sides were temporarily back on the same chariot. Due to the presence of Brando and Eek, Princess Griffine's status had improved a lot. But the morale of the soldiers was still a problem. Brando threw this problem to Cruz and asked Wood to persuade the nobles of the Northern Coalition army to mobilize supplies from the vicinity of Buñuel, at least to let Anthony and Count Austin's army celebrate a victory. As long as there is hot meat soup, even in this terrible weather, the ordinary soldiers will still be satisfied. Before evening, Brando had begun to send scouts to the periphery to get information about the vicinity of the port, as well as whether the port had fallen into the hands of the demons and the number of demons. But considering that the residents of the surface world knew little about the situation in the underground world, Brando decided to go in person and explore the vicinity of Ampere Seal. His risky action was naturally strongly opposed by Amandina, and even Princess Griffin did not quite agree with it. But he still decided to go ahead.
It was just that he did not expect that Her Royal Highness could not stop him from taking the risk and insisted on going with him. She ordered Oberway to stay behind to pacify the soldiers, then changed into a knight's uniform, mounted a horse, and joined his team. Count Austin went with her. Brando was naturally powerless to stop what Her Royal Highness wanted to do. Fortunately, he did not intend to fight with the demons. He just wanted to investigate the situation at the front line, so he let her be. Brando naturally would not think that Her Royal Highness was particularly concerned about him. Perhaps it was also because of this. But there were a few times when he saw the half-elf girl's bright silver eyes reflecting the rain, and he thought to himself that she must not be satisfied with her identity as a woman. Indeed, she was far more suitable for the throne than her brother. I just don't know if those cavemen will give us a night to rest. Count Austin replied with some uneasiness. Brando could understand Austin's uneasiness. Events like the demon invasion could be big or small, and it happened in the surface world all the time. For example, an evil sorcerer summoning a demon and forming a contract with it, or occasionally, a ferocious beast from the Sulphur River escaped to the surface. These events were not important. But once a situation like this happened, where the demons controlled one or more large teleportation portals, it would be a serious matter. Because the demons themselves also had the technology to create teleportation portals, if the local lords did not react quickly and destroy the teleportation portals, the army of creatures in the lower world would snowball rapidly. In history, there were a few incidents where a country was destroyed. The earliest example was in the year of the Golden Hoof. Then it happened again in the year of glory. That unlucky duchy was very close to Erewhon, near the duchy of Antiburo. I'm afraid not. Brando replied. The demons were not like Erewhon's wyvern cavalry. They could march well at night, but the heavy rain would also hinder their movements. The hillsides in the black pine forest became slippery and difficult to walk on under the heavy rain, and the sky became a line at the end of the horizon. Fortunately, Brando was very familiar with the terrain in this area. The group bypassed a few short hills, and then a mountain peak appeared in their sight. This was Brando's goal. Under the protection of the night, he, the princess, and Count Austin climbed up the highest mountain closest to Ampere Seal in the rain. Then they looked down from the top of the mountain. The direction of the port was dark, which was one of the worst signs. He looked up and saw a few dark clouds floating from the north. Then he found that they were all harpies. They were close relatives of the sirens, but they were expelled in the Battle of Cairano and later hid in the underground world.
Brando put down the binoculars in his hand and could not help but take a breath of cold air. He looked back and saw that Her Royal Highness was pale. As Wood had expected, there was already an army from Jorgendy Ridge in the port of Ampere Seal. The three of them were silent for a while. Those don't seem to be demons. Her Royal Highness asked. Brando nodded. He glanced at the other two, but found that they did not seem to realize that there was a problem. The army of Jorgendy Ridge was mixed in with the demons, which was not a good sign. There were not only cavemen in the underground world, but most of the surface residents were called cavemen. Few of them could distinguish the relationship between the demons and the other forces in Jorgendy Ridge, so it was understandable that they showed such an attitude. But Brando knew that Jorgendy Ridge was actually a general term. The underground world was crisscrossed and connected to many areas, such as the Mushroom Field and the Eternal Dark Abyss. The Sulphur River where the demons lived was actually the lowest level of the core world, isolated by the elemental boundary of Wound. The first to discover them were the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves built a city on the lava plains, Scorching Tip. Due to the influence of the dark magic, the high-ranking nobles of the city quickly corrupted and destroyed the seal of the elemental boundary. The demons broke out of the box, and the Dark Elven Empire disappeared. After that, the Dark Elves retreated into the Eternal Dark Abyss, and the demons quickly occupied a piece of land and became one of the original inhabitants of the underground world. However, the residents of the underground world were hostile to each other. The Jorgendi Ridge Empire, which was controlled by the Black Dragon, would never surrender to the demons. How did the two races mix together? Brando remembered that the first time Jorgendi Ridge invaded the surface world in history was at the beginning of the Second Era, after the Second War of the Black Rose. That was the fourth chapter of the game, Eternal Dark. Could it be that there were some unknown changes in the underground world? It couldn't be. Brando didn't think that the history he changed would affect Jorgendi Ridge so quickly. The Halran Gaia was already a coincidence among coincidences. But in any case, the real problem still needed to be solved. Mr. Brando, what should we do now? Princess Griffin asked. There were so many harpies in the sky that they looked like a dark cloud. She never dreamed that such a large army would gather near Ampere Seal in just one day. The number of demons on the ground could be imagined. This was a force that even Anthony's army and the Northern Coalition army together could not resist. Brando also looked at this scene and was silent for a moment. I don't have any good ideas. Mr. Brando, you don't have any ideas? Princess Griffin was almost speechless. Brando nodded. All for One's move was indeed beyond his expectations. The demon army now was almost more than the previous Holy Cathedral of Fire and the Northern Coalition army combined, and he no longer had the ability to start the cycle of the Paradise of Adversity again in a short time. Summoning the Holy Cathedral of Life, the Adversity Trojan Horse, and all the pre-cycles, he had to accumulate elements for a long time. At least he didn't have to think about it for a week. He pursed his lips tightly, and for a moment his mind was full of thoughts about the current situation. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:19. Dark clouds gathered in the north, and the port of Ampere Seal was pitch black. However, outside the port, there was a sea of sparks, as if lava was flowing all over the ground. That was the characteristic of the Devil's Charred Land. The portal obviously connected the Sulphur River and Erewhon together, and the two sides overlapped. On the charred land, the transformed portal emitted a scarlet color, which was clearly visible from this direction, like agate scattered on a black velvet carpet. The scene was like the end of the world, and everyone could not help but hold their breath. Brando listened to the princess's question and lowered his head to think of a solution. But at this time, the dark clouds in the sky suddenly changed direction. The princess and the others were slightly startled, and felt that something was wrong. The knight could not help but look at each other, and then subconsciously looked at the young lord beside them. After all, none of them had actually seen the creatures of Jorgendi Ridge, and the one who seemed to be the most knowledgeable was undoubtedly the Lord of Trendheim. Brando came back to his senses. He raised his head and noticed the change in the sky. His face suddenly changed, and he shouted, "Quick, cover the reflective things on your body with a cloak." The harpies had an extremely wide field of vision and were very sensitive to light. They also liked to collect shiny things to decorate their nests, which was similar to their winged counterparts. And for the same reason, they could easily catch faint reflections dozens of miles away, which made them excellent scouts. It was obvious that someone's armor reflected lightning that caught their attention. It was also a moment of carelessness that he forgot to mention it to the others. It was probably because he saw the army of Georgandy Ridge earlier, and his mind was distracted for a moment. Everyone hurriedly wrapped their armor with their cloaks, and then fastened the laces on their collars. However, it seemed that it was a little too late. When they raised their heads, they saw that a few dark clouds in the northern sky had already begun to move southward. Those strange creatures with pairs of wings spread out in groups in the sky, and in the blink of an eye, they had already swarmed over in an overwhelming manner. Brando looked back and saw that everyone's faces were completely pale, and Princess Griffin was no exception. There were only 17 of them in total, while there were tens of thousands of harpies on the other side. One of the knight even unsheathed his sword subconsciously. Brando was startled and rushed over to stop him. "Don't move. They haven't discovered us yet," he shouted loudly, afraid that someone would pull out their sword in a panic. Once the reflection of the blade was emitted, everything would be too late. "Quick, find a place to hide." Brando knew the habits of harpies very well. These cautious creatures must have come to check after attracting attention. They liked to move in groups, but they might not have really discovered them. After all, this place was still more than 10 miles away, and the harpies might not be able to detect even the slightest movements in the forest. But the knight had already lost their minds. Brando's words became their only hope. They all retreated to the back of the black pine forest and found a place to hide. Brando pulled the princess to hide under a huge rock. This gray-white rock stretched across the top of the mountain and was covered with moist moss. Brando first settled the princess down, then guarded the entrance of the cave. He raised his head and found Count Audine hiding behind a rock opposite him, shouting at him, "Don't worry, Count Audine. Horses." Brando then remembered that everyone's horses were still at the foot of the mountain. He suddenly had a headache, but it was obviously unrealistic to rush down the mountain now. He could only hope that Martha would prevent the harpies from discovering the war horses. In just a few minutes, the harpies had already arrived. The sound of flapping wings passed over his head, letting him know that the winged creatures were close by. His heart pounded, but Brando did not dare to stretch his head out to look. He looked back and saw Princess Griffin sitting at the side, looking at him. Although she looked a little nervous, her eyes were calm when she looked at him. "Don't worry," he mouthed to her. Princess Griffin nodded gently, one hand on the hilt of her sword. He looked up again and saw that Count Audine's face was also pale. The two of them looked at each other and could not help but smile bitterly. He knew that he was not much better. He dared to fight Williams because he had Kelsey's deck of cards in hand. But now, there were 17 people facing thousands of harpies, and there were 10 times that number in the distance. Even if he was drowned, he would still be drowned. But fortunately, although the harpies were very sensitive to light, their eyesight was extremely ordinary. Moreover, they were very cautious creatures, and would definitely not descend below the canopy to check. Brando, who knew this in his heart, was slightly relieved. But it was at this moment that his heart throbbed. It was like his heart suddenly skipped a beat, feeling that someone was spying on his secrets. The others were fine, but the experienced Brando immediately realized what it was: magic. Detection magic. He was sure that there was a pair of malicious eyes inspecting this place through the crystal ball, and the demon warlocks in blood-red robes that came from under the Sulphur River were the best at this. Her Royal Highness beside him turned pale, and her weak body trembled, as if she had also sensed something. Brando subconsciously felt that something was wrong, and immediately reminded her, "Quick, don't think about anything that you are most worried about now. Think about what to eat tonight, the annoying carrot stew or oatmeal." The half-elf girl's silver eyes looked at him in confusion. "This is a demon spell, black magic. It will affect your mind and see the answer it wants to know through your mind. The more afraid you are, the more negative emotions accumulate, and the more it can see what you are most afraid of now. That will expose our position. But I don't hate carrot stew, Princess Griffin replied with a little grievance. That's impossible. Brando was stunned. But regardless of whether it was possible or not, just as the two of them were a little relieved, a scream suddenly came from the distance in the rain. Someone was discovered. Brando's heart went cold. He should have let everyone hide together. After all, he was the only one here who had experience in avoiding detection spells. Mr. Brando. Her Royal Highness whispered. Brando's hand clenched the hilt of Halran Gaia for a moment. Should he rush out now? The harpies were just upper silver-ranked monsters, and the knights he brought were all at the peak of silver-ranked. If he rushed out now, he might be able to save the other party's life. But what about Her Royal Highness? If he made a move, could he lead these people to kill their way out of the thousands of harpies? Brando had no confidence at all. But he immediately felt cold fingers on the back of his hand. Mr. Brando, I understand your thoughts, thank you, Princess Griffin said softly, but no matter what, please don't go against our ideals and pursuits. This is the value of our existence. She nodded to him. Brando's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly understood why when Orthless warned him to be careful of the princess, he did not take it seriously. Princess Griffin had never changed. If she had chosen to compromise, she would not have broken with the royal faction. In the face of ideals and reality, she had always been the holy princess. Brendel had never seen a person who could combine wisdom and conviction into a single person. Before that, the players of Erewhon had never seen such a person. He made up his mind. He raised his sword and rushed out, only to be met by a harpy that immediately swooped down on him from the sky. Her beautiful female head had blood-red eyes that flashed with a venomous light. She opened her sharp claws and slashed at him like 8 knives. Brando was not in a hurry. He pursed his lips and took a step back. He pulled out Halran Gaia with both hands and swung it upwards. The blade immediately cut off a pair of claws. The harpy who lost her balance screamed and fell backward. Her head hit the trunk of a black pine tree, and her brain splattered. Brando then saw the knight who was caught. He was not in a good situation. He was surrounded by 7 or 8 harpies.
Without a second thought, he raised his hand and shot a wind bullet in that direction. The wind bullet spun and brushed past the treetops, hitting the 2 harpies squarely. Instantly, the harpies' wings were torn apart, and blood rained down. The sudden attack frightened the harpies, and they all scattered while screaming strangely. The knight finally found a chance to breathe. He turned back and looked at Brando gratefully. "You shouldn't have come out, my lord." He smiled. "I don't want to be a coward like those northerners." "You are from the royal faction, right?" Brando saw that the other party was from Lantern Island. "Yes." Brando nodded and shouted, "I heard that the royal faction never leaves their companions. If that's the case, everyone, why don't you listen to my orders and face the enemy head-on? Today, we will kill our way out. These monsters can't stop us." The knight was excited and couldn't help but agree. They all pulled out their longswords and quickly gathered together. Now everyone was exposed to the sight of the harpies. They screamed in the air, but the power of Brando's wind bullet made these cautious creatures not dare to try again. Brando reached out to help the princess. In his impression, this strong-willed princess would stand up on her own. But this time, Princess Griffin put her hand in his and smiled politely at him. Then, she used his strength to stand beside him. "Thank you, Mr. Brando," she said softly. Brando heard unreserved trust in this sentence. The harpies began their second round of attack. They fell like raindrops. Brando hurriedly led the knight to retreat. Behind them was a dense forest. The canopy of the black pine forest naturally blocked the attack of the harpies. But sooner or later, they would attack them through the layers of branches. Brando knew that he had to find a way to get down the mountain and back to the horse. The harpies were good at fighting in the air. Their specialty was flexibility, but they were not outstanding in speed and endurance. He had to find a way to get rid of them. The harpies had already descended from the treetops. Brendel looked up and saw that their claws were sharp and sharp. They grabbed onto the tree trunks tightly and jumped forward. They were not any slower than flying, and in a few moments, they were above Brendel's head. This scene was very similar to the first time he fought with these feathered beasts in the wetland forest near Grey Haven. He subconsciously shouted, "Shoot them down. Try to shoot them in the back." The knight immediately took out the short bows and four-armed crossbows from their waists and aimed at the monsters. The harpies were terrifyingly agile. They circled left and right between the tree trunks. Almost all the arrows that were shot missed. But the knight soon found the trick. They found that the harpies liked to extend a distance when dodging.
With Brando's reminder, the knight in the second round of attack calculated the distance behind the monsters. This time, more than half of the harpies were shot. The knight was excited. "My lord, how did you know? Knowledge is power. The answers to the world are in the scrolls," Brando said casually. This sentence sounded like an enigmatic wizard. The knight immediately showed a look of awe. But this sentence also reminded the princess of the knowledge that Fleetwood had taught her. Wisdom sharper than swords is hidden in the scrolls. This was an ancient proverb in Cruz. It was said that the mages all believed in the same idea. Her hand was tightly held by Brando. She ran forward with all her might, but her heart was calm. She thought to herself, "Mr. Knight is indeed a Danny Lean. He admires the knowledge of the Highland mages so much." At this time, Brando noticed that the experience points of the harpies killed by the knight were also counted to him. One harpies gave him 60 experience points. This was obviously the result of the calculation of the penalty for teaming up and the level penalty. But the harpies he killed alone only gave him about 90 experience points. This amount of experience points was nothing to him at the moment. But the key point was that it further confirmed his previous speculation about teaming up. It seemed that as long as they were on the same side, they would be in the same party as him. He just did not know the upper limit of the distance. The group had now passed through half of the forest. More and more harpies were climbing down from the tree trunks in all directions. They did not dare to stop and rest for a moment. If they were even a little slower, they would be surrounded. Previously, a moment of carelessness had already caused two knights to be dragged out. One could imagine the fate that awaited them. Seeing that the end of the forest was approaching, there was an open space outside. It was at least 100 meters wide. When they passed through there, the harpies would obviously launch the fiercest siege. In fact, Brando already had some harpies hovering in the sky over there. "Brando, what do we do next?" Obviously, Count Audine had also noticed the predicament that they were about to face. But Brando looked around and was at his wits' end. Almost none of the cards in his hand were suitable. Even if there were, they lacked elements. He had already summoned the Black Wolf once. He only had the giant King Bunny's concealment cloak to escape this disaster. But Bunny's concealment cloak could only accommodate 10 people, and it could only last for less than 5 minutes. "Everyone, hold hands and charge together. Be careful not to be dragged out." Brando activated conflicting aura, and a pale yellow aura array immediately spread out from his body. Most of the knights recognized the signature skill of this Knight of the Templar and understood what he was going to do. Now, it seemed that they could only brace themselves and charge out. Brando looked outside the forest and decided to cast a mist spell or a similar spell first. Anyway, he had the level of an elementalist. Mist spell was just a level 2 spell, so it was not difficult for him. The only trouble was that he was still wearing armor when he was running, so the failure rate of casting the spell was frighteningly high. Brando tried 3 times in a row before he finally cast the spell. Mist spell was actually just to create a hazy mist. This spell was very effective in defending against the enemy's accurate long-range attacks. Brando wanted to use this spell to prevent the harpies from taking advantage of their numbers. But he did not expect that the moment he cast the spell, an unexpected scene would happen. It was not mist that emerged in the open space, but a dark cloud. This dark cloud seemed to cover the entire hillside in the blink of an eye, and the surroundings were plunged into darkness. What's going on? The knights suddenly fell into a panic. Brando was also shocked. This was not a mist spell. Fortunately, it was not the first time he fought in the dark. In the game, he had to be prepared to deal with all kinds of dark spells when he fought against the Lich of Madara. Brando was still calm. He subconsciously grabbed the princess' hand to make sure that the wizard who cast the spell was not targeting the most important target beside him. At the same time, he held his breath and listened to the sounds around him. The sound of rain in the distance was loud, but in the rain, there were the same panicked cries of the harpies. It seemed that the newcomer was not an enemy. At least, it was not a demon warlock. He was a little relieved, but it was at this time. He felt an old voice in his mind. Please come with me, my king. Do not care about the dangers around you. Go north, I'll wait for you there. Brando was slightly stunned. Who are you? How can I trust you? He asked in his mind. Use your heart to feel. The darkness is no secret in front of you. You should be able to feel that I have no evil intentions. Brando took a light breath. He did not have a premonition of danger. The other party obviously wanted to help him in this situation, but he still had to be careful. He hesitated for a moment before saying to everyone around him, "Everyone, listen to me. Hold hands and follow me." Then he reached out and pulled Count Audine on the other side. Everyone held hands together. Brando did not know which direction was north, but he vaguely felt that one direction was safer, so he subconsciously walked in that direction step by step. Sure enough, after a few minutes, the screams of the harpies in the dark were getting farther and farther away. Everyone could not help but let out a sigh of relief. After all, no one wanted to die if they could. Because of that, the knight could not help but feel grateful to Brando for helping them escape. Mr. Brando, Princess Griffin's voice came from behind him. Is this your magic? No, I don't know. Brando replied. In fact, he did not have any confidence. He had already opened a spiritual link in his mind and began to contact the Shire on the other side. God knows if this was another trap, but he had to be safe. The Shire, you damned bastard, can you hear me? In the pine forest, the students had temporarily built a camp to shelter from the rain. A wooden wall was built with pine wood, and a waterproof canvas was propped up on both sides to form a simple tent. In the tent, Makarov and the rest of the royal faction were in a cold war with Oberwei. It seemed like the royal faction was about to break off relations with the princess again, but those who were here all along knew that it was just a disagreement over the next battle plan. Oberwei supported Brando's idea and thought that it was better to divide the defense area with the Northern Alliance temporarily. Makarov did not trust the nobles in the north at all. In his opinion, the Northern Alliance could be the main force in Cruz's army to defend against the Devil's attack, while the nobles would attack the Devils from the flanks. The parchment map, which had been drawn countless times, was now placed on the wooden table. Amandina and Countess Yenbao, Dilferi, were whispering to each other. The two of them were not interested in the nobles' battle plan. Dilferi looked down on the royal faction, while Amandina only had absolute trust in Brando. Naturally, she was not interested in the nobles' suggestions. However, the fatigue on Amandina's face was obvious, and she did not let out a yawn. Makarov and Oberwei seemed to be natural enemies. The two of them had different opinions on the future of the royal faction, and now they had different opinions on how to cooperate with the Northern Alliance. Fortunately, they were aware of the current situation and did not start a fight. Otherwise, the cunning fox and the lone wolf of the kingdom would have to duel again. The older generation of the kingdom's nobles might still remember the last time they dueled. That was when they were young, but that was for their beloved lady. This time, it was for their ideals and beliefs. Just as they were about to speak again, Charles walked in from the outside. He glanced at everyone in the tent and said, "Let's go back to our camp. My lord is in trouble." Everyone was stunned. "All right, it's like this. Her Highness and my lord were discovered by the harpies of Georgandy Ridge, and they are currently surrounded by the devils." The Shire had to explain again. "What did you say?" "P.S. 6,000 words. Speaking of which, there was a small bug yesterday. I changed the 4th chapter of the game into the 3rd chapter. The first 4 chapters of the Amber Sword are, Chapter 1, The Birth of All Things, The Rise of Madara. Chapter 2, War and Chaos, The War Between the Holy Temples, Chapter 3, Ancient Legacy, The Excavation of the Slate and the Beginning of the Slate War, Chapter 4, Eternal Darkness, The Beginning of the Great Demonic Tide. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 620. At the same time when Brendel's party was attacked, the Kurlut's defense line was dark and heavy rain was pouring down. Sir Hawthorne rode his war dragon through the forest with his monk soldiers. "What the hell?" he grumbled in a low voice. "Lucky for those Aween people to be able to endure this weather, it's enough for us." The monk soldiers laughed in a low voice. Hawthorne was from the warm northern foothills of Cruz Mount Merlan. He was very uncomfortable with the damp and cold of Ampere Seal in this season. The dragon under the saddle was more than 3 meters tall, and the iron armor on its body weighed half a ton. It was the most common mount for heavy cavalry in this era. With every step it took, the ground seemed to tremble slightly, leaving a mud pit several inches deep in the muddy woodland. The reason why they were here was because they received a report that a corvette of the Canolia fleet was attacked by strange creatures on the way back after the Erewhon Royal Fleet stopped attacking. However, the dragon cavalry of the Erewhon Northern Coalition Army did not find any trace of the corvette in the relevant airspace, so it was their turn to send their ground troops. Hawthorne was willing to bet that the corvette must have crashed. The group passed through the forest, and a burning wreckage of a warship appeared in front of them. The once majestic war machine was now only a broken frame, broken masts and sails were scattered on the ground, and even many cables were still hanging on the nearby branches. This is the corvette that was reported to have been attacked and crashed. What a huge thing. Sir Hawthorne couldn't help but think. Oh my God, it's the bull shark. Someone recognized the corvette and couldn't help but cry out in surprise, who on earth made it look like this? I think we'll know soon. Sir Hawthorne suddenly raised his head and pulled out his sword. There's an enemy, get ready to fight. Following his roar, everyone saw a pink monster suddenly crawling out from the wreckage of the warship. The monster climbed up the fallen mast and quickly reached the broken part. It was a giant monster that looked like both a bat and a humanoid creature. It was about 2 to 3 meters tall, and its forelimbs were more developed than its hind limbs. Its upper arms were muscular, and it had a bull-like head on its neck. It also had a nose ring. It's a devil, a reckless devil. Someone with sharp eyes called out the monster's name at a glance. Demons were one of the archenemies of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. The soldier monks had seen images of these demons in various scrolls and books. Spread out. Sir Hawthorne reacted faster than they did. The brute devils were the main air force of the Sulphur River. Young brute devils had the strength of a pinnacle silver rank, and once they reached adulthood, they would have the strength of a beginner gold rank. And the brute demon in front of Sir Hawthorne had already grown long horns. It was clearly a genuine adult brute demon overlord. Brute demon overlords, like many other demons, had the innate ability to control flames. They had several flame spell-like abilities. The fireball spell was one of them. With a flash of fire, a ball of flame had already exploded in the formation of the soldier monks of Cruz's holy cathedral of fire, and several young soldier monks suddenly turned into flaming men. After releasing the fireball, the brute demon overlord let out a roar on the broken mast, as if it was enjoying the pleasure of killing. Damn demon! Sir Hawthorne couldn't help but be furious. He immediately ordered the war dragon to speed up. The brute demon overlord flapped its wings and flew up from the ship, flying into the air and throwing fireballs at him one after another. But Sir Hawthorne was not afraid. It was as if he was walking through the flames, and when he was close enough, he took a short spear from behind him and threw it forward. The soldier monks only saw a straight golden line fly out from Sir Hawthorne's hand, and the next moment, it hit the brute demon overlord in the sky. It was a special magic spear of the holy cathedral. The spearhead had been sanctified and was the natural enemy of demons. When the short spear hit the wings of the brute demon overlord, it was like a drop of water rolling into boiling oil. With a crash, a blazing white flame burned fiercely. The brute demon overlord screamed and fell from mid-air, hitting the broken mast of the warship. Its head was immediately separated from its body, and its spine was pulled a few meters away from its muscles. It couldn't be more dead. The soldier monks were stunned for a moment before they let out a cheer in unison. Hawthorne also breathed a sigh of relief. He turned his head, and in his heart, he probably already knew what the attack on the bull shark was that caused it to crash. It seemed that Archbishop Wood's guess was right. The demons had invaded Erewhon on a large scale. The demons lacked an advanced air force, and the brute demon overlord was already one of the best elite flying troops under the Sulphur River. But it was at this time that he suddenly heard someone scream, "What is that?" Sir Hawthorne was startled and subconsciously turned his head to follow the voice. He felt that the sky seemed to brighten slightly. The layers of dark clouds in that direction parted, and a flaming meteorite fell from the sky and fell in a certain direction. Then, as if it was a copy of this scene, the black clouds rolled as if boiling, and countless fiery red spots appeared behind the separated clouds. Then meteorites tore through the dark clouds and fell, and for a time, half of the sky was reflected in a blood-red color. Sir Hawthorne was completely stunned. He had already estimated that the meteors were falling in the direction of the main position of the Northern Coalition Army. It's over. His heart was cold. He saw with his own eyes a meteor hit the Perrin in the distance in mid-air. The Curlut's flagship turned into ashes in a dazzling light at that time. At that moment, Sir Hawthorne even forgot that the captain of the Canolia fleet was still on the flagship. In fact, he had lost the ability to think at all. There was no magic array in the sky. This was the curse of the demons. It should be the top 14 circle spell, Doomsday. A high-grade demon of the Lord level entered the portal. This was the only thought left in his mind. What did you say? Where are they now? Makarov and Oberway spoke at the same time, but they did not have time to continue. Suddenly, a bright light flashed outside the camp, and a cry of alarm came from outside the tent. Half of the sky outside the tent seemed to have lit up. Something big had happened. Everyone was shocked. The Shire was the first to react and turned to open the tent door. Then, the red-haired girl who had been silent all this time rushed out from beside him, followed by Amandina. Makarov and Oberway looked at each other and followed out. Once they walked out of the tent, everyone suddenly lost the ability to speak. In their field of vision, they could only see that the sky in the northwest was brightly lit. Countless meteors fell from the sky like rain, crashing to the ground. Makarov quickly calculated that the direction was Bunyuofen. The demons have begun to attack the Northern Coalition Army. He immediately came to a conclusion. That's Doomsday, the enemy has an ultimate wizard. Oberway sucked in a breath of cold air. It's a demon lord, Martha above. This time, there will be an entire demon army, more than the last time recorded in history. Everyone knew which time he was talking about. That time, a kingdom similar in size to Erewhon was completely destroyed and turned into scorched earth. Under the demon's rampage, millions of lives were completely wiped out. In fact, it was no longer a war, but a massacre and disaster. It was a scar in the history of Wone that would never be erased. But this time, it seemed that it was the ancient kingdom of Aween's turn. What did Erewhon's people do wrong to deserve such a punishment? Everyone could not help but have this thought in their minds. But the kingdom's lone wolf was the first to react. Makarov! He yelled. I know, Oberway, I made a mistake. Makarov also suddenly realized his mistake. Although he originally wanted the Northern Coalition army to be cannon fodder, he suddenly realized that he had misjudged the strength of the demons. The situation now was very clear. If the two sides did not unite, neither side would be able to fight against such an army of demons. In fact, even if they united, there was little hope. We must immediately find a way to support the Northerners. Makarov gritted his teeth. After the spell, the demons will definitely launch a ground attack. The Northerners and Cruz's people will definitely not be able to hold on. Once they retreat, Erewhon will be finished. Oberway nodded, but his heart was filled with anger. This was all done by Cruz and the Holy Cathedral of Fire. He finally understood why Brando was so angry and did not even give the Holy Cathedral any face and ruthlessly extorted a large sum of money from them. Now that he thought about it, if it was him, it would be great if he did not break off relations with the Holy Cathedral on the spot. But what about the Lord and Her Highness? Amandina suddenly said, they are still surrounded by the demons. Oberway and Makarov were stunned. They seemed to have forgotten about this problem. Where are they now? Did Brando say anything? Oberway asked. According to the Lord, they should be in the mountains near the west of Mdmarchenko. The Harpies have sealed off their retreat, and they have no choice but to retreat to the north. The Lord ordered us to send the royal fleet to support the princess and open a path for them. The Shire said. I already said that they should not have put themselves in danger. Makarov snorted in annoyance. Her Highness also has her own temperament. She should have expected this situation. Look at this, the demons are attacking us, and we have to think of a way to save them when we are barely able to defend ourselves. But other than Brando, who else here is more familiar with Georgandy Ridge? The princess is willing to put herself in danger. This is a noble action. Makarov, I thought you were just brainless, but I didn't expect you to give up the honor of being a noble. The kingdom's lone wolf sneered. What did you say? That's enough, stop arguing. Amandina stood up and interrupted the two of them. Her brows were furrowed into a knot. What else did the Lord say? She asked the Shire. She felt that Brando was not someone who would give orders so rashly. Actually, the Lord has other plans. He wants us to inform Archbishop Wood and let Cruz cooperate with us. The Shire said. What does he want to do? Makarov raised his eyebrows and looked sharply at the young wizard. What does he want to do? Wood also wanted to know. The demons had already launched an attack on the Bunyuo region. To put it nicely, the Northern Alliance was retreating, but it was just a sign of collapse. This was an army that had already been defeated, and they had already lost their morale. Now it was the Holy Cathedral of Fire that was holding on, but they also suffered heavy casualties under the attack of doomsday spells. Canolia's fleet was almost completely wiped out. Admiral Earl Robbins and the Perrin sank together, and more than half of the White Wing Knight Regiment were killed. A large number of high-grade demons appeared in the battlefield, and even more dangerous was that an army of Georgandy Ridge was also fighting with the demons. The first to discover this information was a group of stone statues of the Northern Alliance's mountain infantry that the scouts found on the battlefield. It was obviously not a sculpture, but a masterpiece of Medusa. Crews can only hold on for 3 more hours. After half a day, we will lose the last soldier. And you should know what the Northern Alliance is like. A holy knight replied to the young wizard in front of him. We need support. Wood actually knew the other party, the famous young wizard of the Pilus family, the Shire. We can support you. In fact, our army is already on the way. But after that, we still can't stop the demons' attack. You know our situation. The Shire replied. The Holy Knight couldn't help but be silent. So how long can we hold on? Wood asked. 1 day at most. Can we still open another door of flame and ask for support from the headquarters of the Holy Cathedral of Fire? The Shire asked. That's impossible, we don't have enough materials on hand. A Holy Knight retorted, it's not a simple matter to build a portal. Wood pondered for a moment and asked, so, what does your lord think? The Shire nodded, in that case, we may still have a chance left. A chance. Brando finally led the remaining 12 Lantern Island Knight out of the pervasive black fog. When they saw the surrounding scenery, they found that they were already in a valley in the north. The valley was cloudy with rain and fog, and not far ahead was an open space in the forest. On the green grass in the open space, there was a group of erect horses eating grass with their heads down. If they were not mistaken, those were the warhorses they thought they had lost earlier. Count Audine and Her Royal Highness followed him on his left and right. They were so surprised by the strange scene in front of them that they were speechless. Oh my God, what the hell is going on? The knight couldn't help but exclaim. Although Her Royal Highness didn't ask, she also cast a puzzled look at Brando. Since Brando could lead them to get rid of the harpies and walk out of the black fog, he should naturally know what the mystery behind all this was. But Brando was also carefully observing the surroundings. The whole valley was shrouded in the sound of the rain, and the surrounding scenery didn't look much different from other places in the Erech Mountains. But he had a subtle feeling in his heart at the moment. May I ask who helped? He couldn't help but ask. Everyone saw a stooped old woman in a black robe suddenly walk out of the forest. When she saw Brando, she bowed respectfully. Her trembling movements made people think that she would fall at any time. Brendel, however, was shocked. Ah, it's you. He had already recognized this wrinkled old woman as the old witch Babasha that he had blackmailed in Fortress Reden, but he never dreamed that he would meet her here. P.S. It's already the 18th of November. Time flies, it's been almost 2 months without a day off. My performance is not bad, right? I'm looking for a vote while I'm at it. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 621. Just as the demons were fighting Erwin's Northern Coalition army and the army of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, in the quiet port of Ampere Seal, the army of Georgandy Ridge quickly occupied the entire port. The coast guards had long been beaten to a pulp by Brando, but these creatures from the underground took advantage. Under the guidance of All for One, they easily opened the city gates and dispersed the remaining coast guards. By nightfall, there was only minimal resistance left in the entire port. In the torrential rain, a graceful figure was slowly going up the spiral stairs of the city tower. Medusa Lysimachia was wearing a white linen robe, revealing her bronze-colored, scaly skin. Her legs were far more slender than those of a human woman. However, she liked to wear her coin-patterned python-like tail on her shoulders, which looked like a shawl. She climbed to the rooftop of the city tower, separated the chattering harpies, and saw the dying Viscount Benninger. She picked up his wrist and chanted a word. A circle of black patterns faintly appeared on the third joint of the Viscount's left index finger. She carefully observed it next to her beautiful prismatic eyes before looking up and asking, "Where did you find him?" The harpies replied in a shrill voice in the unique language of the underground, "Nearby, madam." "Why hasn't the messenger woken up?" "The messenger has been knocked unconscious, madam." Humans are so fragile. Lysimachia was full of disdain. However, she did not dare to show this emotion. This person was an important figure of All for One. All for One was a believer of the Twilight Dragon and worked closely with the demons. It was not something that could be evaluated by lowly people like her. She lowered her head and stuck out her forked tongue to make a black mark on Viscount Benninger's forehead. Then, with a gentle stroke of her hand, she created a cover for him to block the rain. "Let's wait for Lord Brooke to come. Take good care of him. Our enemy this time is the terrible Holy Cathedral of Fire. The Lords still need All for One to unearth that instrument for them. As long as we have a firm foothold, we can have a wider land." Lysimachia seemed to yearn for it. Her beautiful long snake-like hair was raised, and she hissed and flicked her tongue. She looked at the Erech mountains in the distance. The undulating shadows of the mountains were shrouded in gloomy dark clouds. Her beautiful eyes reflected the color of lightning, as if some kind of spark had been ignited. But not far from her, in a leeward place, two ladies were having a serious discussion. "White Mist, we were right to leave Viscount Benninger there. We've caught a big fish. They're definitely up to something. All for One would not appear here otherwise. So what? Do you plan to follow her?" White Mist looked at her from the corner of her eyes. "Of course." Roman nodded matter-of-factly. "With your clumsy tracking skills, we'll be discovered in less than a minute. Then, you'll be captured and killed. If that's the case, I'll have to die too." White Mist calmly attacked her. Roman couldn't help but show a dissatisfied look. His small eyebrows quickly raised. "Is it that bad?" "It's worse than that." "Then we'll have to give up on this plan." White Mist. What do we do next?" The merchant lady very casually rejected the plan that she had thought of for a long time. It was as if she wasn't the one who came up with the plan. "Think about it yourself." White Mist replied lazily. "I know. Brando won't be afraid of enemies on the surface, but it's hard to guard against conspiracies. That's what the night novel says. Besides, Brando looks stupid and easy to fool. We have to dig up the thing that they're going to dig up before they do." Roman immediately came to a new conclusion. "What do you plan to do?" White Mist felt that using Knight's novel as a model for action was a textbook example of what not to do. But this judgment was correct, and she was too lazy to argue. To be honest, if she could, she wouldn't even bother to speak. "Let's go find those sneaky guys first." Roman replied confidently. "Sneaky guys? I saw Duke Erech just now. Didn't that Viscount say that they were also members of that association? Next time, please tell me this earlier." White Mist finally rolled her eyes weakly. This was the first time she made an expression today. "It's you, Baba Shaw." Brando already recognized this wrinkled old woman as the old witch Baba Shaw that he blackmailed in Fortress Reedon. "A witch? Brando, who is she?" Princess Griffin was the first to react. Because they used to follow the Darkness Dragon, witches didn't have a good reputation in the human world, so most of them lived in seclusion. They were shrouded in a halo of evil, mystery, and ulterior motives. Many bedtime stories in Wonde used them as the typical bad humans. Princess Griffin, who grew up in such a cultural atmosphere, was no exception. She only frowned, which showed that she had good self-restraint. Of course, one of the reasons was because the other party helped them once. Not only the princess, but Count Audine also raised his eyebrows slightly. But as a mature noble, he was obviously more shrewd and didn't show the surprise in his heart on his face. "It's me, my lord." She was wearing a long black robe, and her wrinkled face was hidden under a wizard's hat. She bowed respectfully to Brendel. "Everyone, please do not worry. My lord has helped this old woman once, and I have sworn an oath in front of the darkness dragon that I will repay your kindness. Today, I'm here to repay his kindness. My lord, please don't take it to heart." Babasha looked at everyone with her small eyes and replied. This was obviously a lie. When did he help her? It was more like blackmailing her. But Brando could more or less guess why she helped him. Soon, a voice in his heart confirmed this guess. "My lord, don't be confused. We are your loyal followers." At this juncture where history is about to change, the witches of the Winter Kingdom will first fulfill their promise. Sure enough, when Babasha predicted that he would bring the return of the Darkness Dragon in Fortress Reden, he only thought it was ridiculous. However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Later on, he really did become the successor of Odin's inheritance. However, he only obtained a fraction of this inheritance. In fact, he couldn't be considered the real Dark Dragon. He had no idea how this old witch found him. Humph. At this time, there was another cold snort. "Brando, where did you provoke these dirty allies? Do you really want to be the Darkness Dragon?" This was the voice of the Wind Empress. Brando was shocked. He didn't expect the Wind Empress to speak at this time. She and Odin were sworn enemies. In other words, she was also one of the great enemies of these witches. He hurriedly looked up, but found that there was no strange expression on Babasha's face. Only then did he feel relieved. It seemed that Babasha's voice was just a magic effect. She couldn't pry into his thoughts. "She obviously came to me. What does it have to do with me?" Brando couldn't help but answer with grievance. "Humph, you're on your own. Don't be complacent." The Wind Empress coldly dropped a sentence and didn't say anything again. Brando's heart moved. "Madam Wind Empress, I thought you really wouldn't see me today." "You," the Elf Queen gritted her teeth and cursed the pig Brando 10 times in her heart. Then, she made up her mind that this time, she would never pay attention to this guy until the last moment. Brando didn't realize that he had once again greatly offended the Wind Elves' ancestors. If he could, he would have been burned at the stake in the Wind Empress' holy temple. "Babasha, how do you know all this?" he asked. The old witch smiled mysteriously. "Master, you don't have to hide it. As long as the contract on the Black Prophecy has not disappeared, we witches can read all the secrets from it. The Black Prophecy has already predicted everything today. The Dark Dragon will return to the earth. The Black Prophecy also said that Madara will rule the earth, and the 12 branches of the witches will move towards unification. Isn't that just a matter of time?" Brando criticized in his heart. However, he didn't want to get involved with these people. Witches didn't have a good reputation in the mortal world. Getting involved with them was tantamount to admitting his identity as a follower of the Dark Dragon. The followers of the Dark Dragon were just like the cultists in Vaunt, who were under the rule of the 4 holy shrines. They were all hated by everyone. "Could you have made a mistake?" he asked. "No," Babasha seemed to react and replied humbly, "Master, are you worried about your identity?" "It doesn't matter. We will help you in secret. We will never expose your identity, at least until the Second Judgment Day." "What is the Second Judgment Day?" Brando felt that talking to these witches would make him half crazy sooner or later. However, if Babasha was really as she said, the witches would be quite a good help for him. Witches and prophets were the first mortals in the world to master the power of magic. The ancient wizards achieved the magic of mortals by developing the magic in words and languages. The source of their power was actually the 12 moons reflected by the dark magic in the sky. Therefore, there were 12 different branches of witches walking on the earth. For example, the Roman ant was the eternal witch with the magic moon in the constellation Lyra. The strongest branch of the Bunasan of the witch kingdom was the winter witch of the witch king. The witches had been eroded by the dark magic for a long time, so they became strange. Most of them were evil, cruel, and murderous, but there were also some kind and rational existences. However, without exception, they were all firm followers of the order. No matter how different the world was, there was no denying that they were as irreconcilable as the pagans. This was why Brando would never wallow in the mire with All for One, but could accept the inheritance of the Dark Dragon. For the same reason, he didn't mind Babash's help, as long as it didn't cause him trouble. He pondered for a moment. Babasha, you said that the Winter Kingdom responded to the promise. You didn't complete the dark sky curtain by yourself, did you? Master, there were several sisters with me, Babasha replied. Brando's mind suddenly had the same dry faces. Due to their specialization in dark magic, witches liked to live in seclusion in wild areas. A small kingdom on the border of civilization like Erewhon was simply a paradise for them. At least for witches like Babasha, he knew more than a few in Erewhon. In fact, the Roman ant, Aunt Jenny, was a typical example. How strong are they? They're basically the same as me, master. Brando raised his head and looked at Babasha with sharp eyes. Babasha, you said that the Winter Kingdom would respond to the promise of the Witch King to the Dark Dragon. The Bunasan of the Witch Kingdom you speak of isn't just a few of you, is it? Of course not, they're just limited by their own constraints and can't come. Master, please don't doubt our loyalty. Babasha's face was respectful, but she was a little hesitant. Brando understood everything. He already knew that the 12 branches of the witches were scattered on the earth, and presumably they wouldn't agree with each other's opinions. Although he was the heir of the Dark Dragon, he wasn't the only heir of the Dark Dragon. Babasha came to him, obviously to invest in the long term. This old witch was quite shrewd, but Brando really didn't think highly of the few silver-ranked witches at present. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Babasha, you don't think you can help me with this little power, do you? Of course not, Babasha said quickly, but Sir Lord, the power of the witches has always been more about wisdom than power. Difficulties that can't be solved by power can be solved by wisdom. In the last two sentences, Brendel and Babasha did not use the whisper magic. Count Audine, who was listening at the side, immediately said, in that case, old witch, what kind of wisdom have you brought to us? His tone was not polite, because witches were simply synonymous with conspiracy, cunning, and deceit among the people. Sir Lord, we can take you through this area and avoid the surveillance of the harpies. Babasha replied. Really? Brando's eyes lit up slightly and asked carefully. You said you can take us through this area without being discovered by the army of Jorgandi Ridge? Exactly. Whether to the south or north? Brando asked. Mr. Brando, what do you want to do? Griffin was shocked by the princess's words. She turned her head and looked at Brando with her silver eyes wide open. She looked surprised as if she was getting to know him all over again. Yes. Yes. The wrinkles on Babash's face seemed to have increased a few more. She was also thinking about something, but she didn't lie. Babasha, how many people can you guarantee will pass through this blockade without being discovered? Brando didn't care about the others. The line in his mind was getting clearer and clearer. No more than 20 people. I see, Brando nodded. Your Highness, the anchor key you gave me can be used to determine the anchor point for Erewhon's first royal fleet, right? How much magic power will it take to activate it? Mr. Brando, Griffin looked at him and whispered, it's too risky. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Calm to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.